Was that too aggressive? That felt too aggressive. Let's try this instead.
Welcome to the tutorial. I'm Taylor Jackson. I am a wedding photographer and have been for just over 15 years now. I've probably photographed about 1,000 weddings at this point. I haven't counted because it's a lot to count that up, but I photograph anywhere between 60 to 70 weddings every single year, and I have a lot of fun doing it. I honestly think that wedding photography is the best job that you can have as far as time freedom goes. It's amazing because yes, you do have to work Saturdays, but the main benefit is that you now have Monday to Friday free. You kind of inverse the 9-to-5 job. And then you're also working for yourself too, that when you are working a 9-to-5 or you're working for someone else, all those hours you're putting in are benefiting somebody else in the future, benefiting a company, benefiting a CEO. When you're working for yourself as an entrepreneur, any of the hours that you put into your business right now just actually pay off for the rest of your life. So if you spend those hours now, it is an investment that will continue to pay off both in time freedom and just in general fun, I think, as well. Like, my big thing is time freedom, followed by interesting experiences that are unlocked by doing something. So I think getting into photography and getting into video is a way to unlock those unique and interesting experiences. And then beyond that, financial freedom is kind of nice to have as well, that you don't have to be too stressed financially. And I feel like the margins in the wedding photography industry, quite honestly, are pretty high. So yeah, amazing business to get into. Today, we're going to be going to a wedding. What I realized though is that I initially wanted to make this just a full day in the lifestyle tutorial where we just went to a wedding and I talked about every individual element. But on really any individual wedding day, you don't get a full mix of the elements. Wedding photography really is a culmination of all other styles of photography. So when you're out there, you're a landscape photographer, you're a product photographer, you're obviously a portrait photographer, you are a fast moving in low light, you're setting up flashes, you're doing everything in regards to photography. I would say the first 10 weddings are very, very stressful. You will leave them feeling completely depleted because you've just worked mentally so hard and you've just, I'm very introverted, so it's very difficult for me to just talk to people all day and to talk to large groups of people. And when you come home from those first weddings, you will be just depleted of all energy and you will need to sleep. After about 10, 12 weddings, you will have problem solved at least all the technical aspects of it, and weddings will become a lot easier from a technical standpoint. If you're introverted and quiet, it's still going to be difficult to do the social element of things, but to not have to do the technical problem solving on the day and to know that you can just go in and you can create amazing work in any situation really does just give you a lot of confidence and a lot of motivation, and motivation to try new and creative ideas as well, which is something that, like, in the beginning, it's you just want to get everything done, you want to make your couples happy. As you move forward, you can get a little bit more creative and you can spend some time doing some ideas that you might not have had the confidence to do early on. Punch in here for a moment. I wanted to let you know that there are chapters in the description below, so if you want a specific topic, you can bounce around. Also, all the presets you're going to see are my presets, also links in the description below. They come as part of the member site as well, so if you're interested, basically what you're going to learn today is all the photography skills required to go and photograph a wedding. A lot of the courses that I have over on the member site that you have access to, if you sign up, you get all of them, are more focused on actually booking weddings, though there are things like the off-camera flash guide and introvert's guide to posing. Those are courses that exist there, but primarily I would say it's mostly business content. So if you're interested in learning how to actually book weddings, the big thing for me is that I wanted to be a second photographer and no one would ever hire me. So I had to kind of just figure it out myself. So all the content on the site is kind of from that perspective, to just go out and build your own business for yourself, that no one else is going to be the person that's pushing you, that you do have to be self-motivated enough to go out and make this happen for yourself. And now back to the tutorial. We'll do one of those slides.
First, we're going to talk about gear and the gear that you need to photograph a wedding. I primarily use a Nikon kit now. You'll see in the video that this is my Canon kit. As a YouTube individual, I also use Sony and Fuji quite often. So I do have a pretty good perspective of all brands out there and how they would integrate into a wedding day. I will do my best to keep an updated list of gear that I would currently recommend in the description below. But know that all companies have professional grade product that I would be totally happy to use at any wedding day. I just happen to be a Nikon shooter primarily. Here's the Canon gear, I guess.
Welcome to the gear section of the video. We're joined today by my usual wedding kit in a Peak Design messenger bag. Inside this Peak Design messenger bag, there are 2 camera bodies. We're gonna talk about them first, then we're gonna talk about lenses, then we're gonna talk about flashes. It is important to have 2 camera bodies as a wedding photographer, or potentially even more. The main thing and the main reason being that you want backup of backup of backup. And for that reason, I also use cameras that have 2 card slots. So as you can see inside here, there are 2 SD cards. That is absolute best case. It is possible to use a camera that only has 1 card slot. Older cameras typically have 1 card slot. If it's something like an XQD, it's very, very secure and there's a very minimal chance of anything ever happening. That said, it is nice to have a 2nd card slot, and every camera manufacturer right now, both in their digital SLRs and also their mirrorless lines, all have cameras with 2 card slots. So if you can get one, pick that up instead. These camera bodies are the Canon R6. I am personally using, for the first time ever, 2 of the exact same camera bodies. In the past, I've never done that. I don't think it's 100% required in order to shoot weddings. If you're shooting a lot of video content, it's nice to have the same bodies just for color matching. It makes your post-production process a little bit easier. I find with photography, it doesn't really matter that much. As long as you're kind of shooting within the same brand, usually, you might see me break this rule on YouTube, but for the most part, if you can shoot the same brand and roughly maybe the same release time, so within plus or minus maybe 3 or 4 years, usually the colors will be close enough out of the camera. The reason that we have multiple camera bodies is for backup. So if something were to happen, if you were to drop one, if one were to get stolen, that you have a backup camera body to go to. We'll talk about the nice to have bag in a moment, which is actually another camera body that I keep in my car in case the absolute worst case happens and both camera bodies happen to go missing during a wedding day or they're stolen or whatever. Again, backup of backup of backup. We're gonna be talking about a lot of backups throughout this entire tutorial. As far as camera bodies go, honestly, there's not a whole lot to talk about. The main thing, we'll get to this in the setup stage, that you want to be able to shoot RAW, which every single camera that's come out really in the past number of years can, as well as you want to have access to manual control settings within your camera. Again, we'll talk about that in a little bit. So really any camera body that has been released within the past 5 or so years is great for wedding photography. A lot of the advancements that you're seeing and the reasons to purchase new cameras all come with video upgrades. And if you're photography only, you don't need those, which means you get to save a lot of money purchasing cameras. That said, make sure you have backups of backups of backups. Now onto lenses. So as you can see, my 2 cameras here, I have a 35 and an 85mm lens. I love to have 2 prime lenses on a wedding day. Getting into photography, it is the most cost-effective way to get really phenomenal quality out of your lenses, as well as that really nice shallow depth of field. If you are looking at something like a 24-70, you're gonna have to spend a lot of money to get one that's of quality. If you're looking at the kit lens that comes with your digital SLR or your mirrorless camera, make sure you really dive into how good that lens is and how well it performs in non-ideal lighting scenarios. When you're outside in the perfect shade, a lot of these cameras are gonna do really well with their kit lenses, but when you get into significantly more challenging environments with lights hanging around the room or spotlights shining into your camera, you are going to start to experience some difficulties with lesser quality glass, including ghosting and chromatic aberration and all kinds of other issues that you can find. So I would say begin with prime lenses. One, as a way, I think, to really hone your craft first. I feel like I'm always a little bit more lazy when shooting with a 24-70. With something like a 35mm lens, you consciously have to frame every single photo, or an 85mm lens, and there is a significant separation between both of these lenses. You can tell when an image is shot with an 85 and you can tell when it's shot with a 35, so your end gallery has a little bit more pop. If you are somebody that enjoys the 50mm focal length, which is generally, I would say, kind of the more quote-unquote normal focal length in the past, at least. I personally, because of my introverted nature, enjoy the 85 focal length. I can be back from people a little bit. I don't have to be all up in their faces. If you are someone that is just fine with that, a 50mm lens might be the option for you, and that kind of splits the middle here. And if you are doing something like a 50 as your main lens, you might want to look at something a little bit wider, on the wider end of things, for your second camera body or to just have in your bag. I would say wedding day, I never really go wider than 24. If I ever do need to go wider than 24, the workaround to that is that you just turn your camera sideways and you make a quick panorama. So say, for instance, we've found ourselves in this room and I have to do a group shot with 35 people. If that all doesn't fit in my 24mm lens view, or 35 in the case of this, at that point, I will just turn my camera sideways. I will make a panorama with everybody smiling, facing the camera. I'll probably do it a few times, make sure nobody blinks. And then I will build that in post-production. Make sure you try that out before just doing it on the day. But know that it is possible, and it is a possible workaround. So you don't have to have the really heavy, super wide angle lenses in your bag all day. This is honestly, this is what I bring to wedding day. In a minute, we're gonna be talking about the nice to have lenses and the lenses that would be the next step in this. But for now, I'm going to keep showing you what's inside this bag. Inside this bag, I have a backup lens, which for whatever reason, if this lens just stops working, this lens stops working, I'm able to still continue my wedding day. One single backup battery and a charger. Depending on the battery life of your cameras, you might require more than this. With this specific system, I'm good with it with the Nikon Z series, which is what we're filming this on. I'm good with just having one single backup battery for that system as well. And a lot of the newer cameras, you can actually charge by USB-C, which means that you can bring a USB-C cord and just a cell phone charger, and you can charge your camera kind of as you go. Some of them will only allow charging when the camera is set to off. Some of them will charge all of the time, but know that that is a possibility. Find yourself running low on a wedding day. And now, moving into flashes, I have one flash. I have a backup flash in my second bag, which we'll see in a moment. This is the Godox or Godox V1, and it is a phenomenally powerful flash. And as you can see, the battery in it is quite significant, which means if you're shooting this at a very high intensity, that you will just you'll have access to use the flash over and over again. And also it will last you all day, no problem. Keep the charger in a second bag just in case something does happen. But I would say it is going to be a very rare circumstance if you can get through an entire battery in this flash throughout the day. They all come with modifiers. So this is the V1C for Canon. If you're a Nikon shooter, V1N. If you're a Sony shooter, V1S. Fuji shooter, V1F. And almost 100% of the time, I'm always going to be using this on my camera. We're gonna talk about off-camera flash in a moment. But I would say as long as I can get away with using on-camera flash, especially the newer camera bodies, that you can just really, you have access to a lot more sensitivity as far as ISO goes than we had in the past. So you have to rely a little bit less on flash. And as long as you have good quality of light, which we're gonna talk about throughout this tutorial, you're likely going to find yourself creating really fantastic images, really just in any situation without a flash. So know that flash comes in as something to enhance the scene rather than something to just light the entire scene. In my Peak Design sling, I have two items that are nice to haves that are not required. And there might be a third item. We're actually filming with it. It's a 24-70 f2.8, quite expensive, but worth having, I think, if you are somebody that, if you're finding yourself in a lot of challenging and also small environments and tight spaces with a lot of people. Most of my weddings, I find that I have enough space to move around that I'm not too worried about something like that happening, that I'm just like really kind of in a corner and I have to make a bunch of frames from that corner. What I find myself doing and using a lot more is this 70-200. I use this for pretty much every ceremony that I ever shoot because of the versatility that I can be from 70-200, which means I have enough zoom to zoom around the scene rather than to run around the scene. And during a ceremony, definitely important that I don't want to be the center of attention. So if I'm able to just get around that room with this, that's going to make me a lot happier and make the guest experience a heck of a lot better. So expensive, but definitely worth it. If you are just starting out and you don't have the capital to buy one of these, there are a number of companies that will rent them and they'll ship them to you in Pelican cases and they'll just arrive at your door and you get to use them for the weekend. Personally, I would spend a lot of my profits from my first wedding to rent this. One, you're gonna get significantly better photos for your couple, and two, selfishly, because if you are in the early stages, you're building your portfolio, and if you can build your portfolio with the best professional gear, it is going to just make that process of starting to book a lot more weddings a lot faster. So 70-200, definitely put it on your list at some point. Until then, you can definitely get away with an 85, or you can buy a 135 or a 105. But I would definitely put this on your list of nice to haves in the future. The second nice to have is an off-camera flash trigger. This is for the Godox system. It is the X2T, and just like the V1, it comes with a modifier based on the first initial of your camera company. And basically what this means is that I can trigger this. So I put this on top of my camera and I'm now able to trigger my flash wherever it is in the room. In my real life experience, I have never put the flash in a place where they haven't been able to communicate. It doesn't require line of sight, that it just goes out and it just finds that flash and it makes it trigger. That said, again, don't use the flash to light the entire scene unless it's absolutely necessary, but it is nice to have maybe a little flash to illuminate the podium so that whoever's speaking, if for instance, if you're on that 70-200 and you're zoomed in way across the room, the best practice is to have your light as close to the subject as possible. So if you can have your flash somewhere right here and somebody's speaking on a microphone right here, you can run anywhere you want in the room and they're still going to be in great light. So something to think about. There's a lot to be learned about off-camera flash, and there's actually a number of videos. If you type in Taylor Jackson off-camera flash, you'll probably find a number of videos that at least kind of go through my process for off-camera flash, which we're not going to get too heavy into throughout this tutorial. But basically my strategy is that I don't set up any soft boxes, octo boxes, really anything at all. That I set up a single flash, the V1, on a light stand and I'm bouncing it off of items around the room. So the ceiling is great. If I was just pointing the light at the ceiling, that it would just give a nice kind of natural light to the scene, or off this wall if I wanted something more three-dimensional and directional. And I find by doing that, it makes the learning curve a lot faster, and the fumbling around to set things up time just doesn't exist anymore, that you just set it up and point at a thing and that's it. Rather than being inside a softbox trying to set your light up and going in and modifying things, it's just on a wedding day, unless you have someone dedicated as an assistant, it just makes it very difficult to actually use in the field. So I find that this works better for me. I feel like it just generally, as far as guest experience and couple experience goes, to have one single light on a light stand is a lot better than setting up a huge softbox somewhere in the room. It still feels like a wedding, and it doesn't feel like you're being too obtrusive to the scene. That is all for nice to have gear. With all of those, I am quite happy to go out and photograph any wedding day. And really that combination of gear is everything that I've used to photograph the last, I don't know, 1,000-ish weddings that I've done. And I've been very happy with it. So that's all for the gear section of this video. Moving into the camera settings that I changed, the physical settings. So this isn't talking about kind of manual photography. This is talking about what I actually changed within the menus. And I'm gonna keep it general for all brands. The thing that I changed first is that I set my camera to RAW mode. A lot of them come in JPEG for some reason, and I just set that immediately to RAW. In wedding photography, I like to shoot RAW plus JPEG. What I use that JPEG for when I get home at the end of the night, it's very easy to upload to the cloud a bunch of JPEG files that maybe takes an hour and a half, rather than trying to upload all the RAW files for offsite backup that might take, depending on where you live, might take a couple of days. And I find that that just kind of something that fits into my workflow and gives me a little bit of, it relaxes some anxiety that at least end of the wedding night, I have an offsite backup somewhere, even if it's just the JPEGs. Number two is to make sure that your camera is shooting to both memory cards. It is important as a wedding photographer to have two memory cards in your camera. Make sure that it's shooting to both. The one time, so basically I would want that shooting full backup so that it's shooting the same RAW and JPEG file to both cards. The one time that I may change that up is if you're shooting hybrid coverage, so you're doing both photography and video. If you need to be switching very quickly between photography and video modes, sometimes whatever the slower card is in there will hold you up a little bit if it's trying to write RAW and JPEG files to it. So in that case, I'll actually set it to be RAW to the main card and JPEG to the secondary card. But that's a very specific thing that hopefully you won't have to worry about. And third, I guess this used to be a thing that I would change on all my cameras, but moving forward into how good the mirrorless cameras are that are coming out now, I don't really do a whole lot. So in the past, I would be changing my digital SLR to autofocus continuous and setting it to single point. So I actually move my single point autofocus around. You can do zones, you can do whatever you're comfortable with, but I personally would use that single point, and I would be setting my focus point. And what autofocus continuous does is basically if that focus point is on somebody and I'm half pressing, that is tracking back and forth with them. With the newer mirrorless cameras, I am pretty happy to let them run on full automatic mode, but I do like to have a quick override set up. So you just have a single button that, for instance, if you can set one button to either add or remove the facial recognition feature, so eye and face autofocus, it is important to have on most of the time. I would say I leave it on 98% of the day, but there are some moments and some quick situations that you find yourself in that you need to quickly disable that, and you don't want to have to go into the menu. So if you can set a button to do that, it's way easier. One situation that would come to mind for that, say the couple is doing the ring exchange and they're up on a bit of a stage and the priest's face is in the background, and it just keeps trying to focus on the priest's face and not on their hands. That would be a time that would be just quickly disable that and actually just focus on their hands. Beyond that, while it is nice to have my Nikon, at least my Nikon Z6II, I set one of the front function buttons to actually cycle through autofocus modes. Well, it's nice to have that. I find that leaving it on full auto mode all the time, and whenever you do need to override something by just touching on the back, the LCD to actually focus on whatever you're touching on, I find that to be a better system. I know you have to pull your camera away from your face to do that, but I found that it's not really that big of a problem, and I can very quickly override any situation in the field, no problem. And that is really all I change when it comes to setting up my camera. The benefit, I guess, of most cameras these days is that they come straight out of the box pretty much ready to go, which is not something that could have been said a bunch of years ago. So enjoy not doing a whole lot. If you discover obviously something that you could do to make your process more efficient, obviously include that. But for the most part, default buttons are going to be pretty good, and they're probably labeled as well, so they're easy to find if you're just out in the field and you're like, oh, like, where's my white balance button? If it's labeled, it's a little bit easier to find than if you've buried it under like C5 or something like that. I guess you could always make labels and put them on if you wanted, but I don't know. Maybe that's a topic for another day. When it comes to actual photography settings, I'm going to walk you through a little bit of my process. So I shoot everything in manual, in full manual mode. It is, I would say, realistic to shoot in aperture priority. If you're on a digital SLR, you're looking through an optical viewfinder, you're not really seeing what the images that you're getting. But if you're on a mirrorless camera, I'd be a lot more comfortable on aperture priority because at least you're seeing the decisions that the camera is making in real time. I personally like shooting manual because it speeds up my post-production at the end of the day, that if I'm shooting aperture priority, everything's kind of a little bit all over the place. It's all pretty close, but it's all going to be, the exposure is just a little bit different. If you're shooting manual, especially for the family photo section of the day, that everything is just a very easy batch correction rather than small adjustments on each individual image. I also personally just kind of like having the full control of manual. When I walk into a scene, my lens is usually set to wide open or near wide open. I will shoot pretty much every lens wide open all day unless given a reason to stop down. That reason could be for family photos if we're adding a second layer of people that I need to make sure that focus goes all the way through. But I would say on a normal wedding day that's maybe 5% of the wedding day, or even less, maybe like 2 or 3%. Because of that, manual is kind of very easy for me. That one of the variables is already kind of locked to being wide open. The other variable of ISO, the ideal is to keep it as low as possible. High ISO in new cameras is no problem anymore, but it still is good practice to keep the ISO as low as you possibly can. So basically I'll walk into a room like this, my f-stop will already be set to wide open. I will have my ISO maybe at 100 or 200, and that will kind of tell me what shutter speed I need. I want to make sure that my shutter speed is higher than the millimeters of my lens. So if you're on an 85mm lens, it's probably good to be at like at least 1/100th of a second or higher. If you have stabilization in that lens or in your camera body, you can kind of go a little bit lower, but also always be aware, or at least in the case of when you're photographing people during a wedding day, that people move, and if you're photographing them at 1/30th of a second, that you're going to start to get a little bit of motion blur whenever they're moving or on their microphones giving their speech, that if they're moving their head a little bit, you're going to start to see a little bit of softness in kind of all of their facial features, but maybe their bodies will be crisp, which would be a little bit of a weird thing. So then as my shutter speed, if it has to come down to let in more light, say it's nighttime in here, so as my shutter speed comes down and I hit that, maybe I'm comfortable at 1/100th of a second on my 85mm lens. At that point, I'll start bringing in ISO to make sure that I'm kind of shooting the exposure that I want. That's kind of, I don't even know what this exposure, it's not really even a triangle anymore, it's just kind of like two elements balancing off of each other, but that's kind of what I do, and that's the way that I've found that it works the best for me. I like having that manual control and knowing exactly what my camera is going to do in every situation, that if I point my camera towards a light, that it's still going to be exposing for the people that I want in the scene, rather than making the frame a whole lot darker because there's now this big light source in the scene. There are a number of settings on photos throughout this tutorial, but there are, I would say, all of the later wedding days that I've done, the full wedding days, they will all have settings on them as well. So if you want to see a full wedding day with all the settings on it, there's a whole lot of them over on my channel. If you choose to shoot aperture priority, and I would probably recommend that for at least the first couple of weddings, it is much easier. You literally set whatever your f-stop, what you want it to be. If you're shooting a good quality lens, you can shoot that wide open for sure. If you want to be adding a little bit more depth of field, or if you're nervous because you're shooting at 200mm and there's two people in the scene and their eyes aren't on the same plane of focus, at that point maybe it makes sense to stop down a little bit. But I would say that I'm pretty happy and pretty comfortable with both the aesthetic look as well as the versatility of the fact that I can go into any room wide open for the most part and have that as a starting point. You'll find that if you're out in bright sun, even if you're at maybe f1.4, at f1.8, I don't think it'll be a problem at all, but 1.4, 1.2, you'll maybe at some point max out your shutter speed. So if your camera only goes up to 1/8000th of a second for shutter, you may max that out and you might not be able to make it the shutter speed any faster. At that point is another time that I would maybe bring the f-stop down a little bit, but I would say that very rarely happens. That happens when I shoot lenses that are the 1.2s, but those are expensive and not really that necessary for wedding photography. That 1.4, 1.8, or f2 is more than good enough in pretty much every case that I have ever found myself in throughout my career of many weddings. Lord of the Rings tree. Beautiful day for some photos. I knew that the last light was going to be happening over here, so we scheduled towards the beginning of golden hour so that we knew for sure that was still going to exist. So that's gonna be the first location. My couple's hotel is conveniently located right here. 4 minutes away. I feel like 4 minutes means there's only 500 steps remaining in this journey.
Did you know that walking downstairs actually burns more calories than walking upstairs? That's not true. I just made that up. This is amazing. All right, I might bring you guys over this way, just like 1 or 2 steps. That's perfect. And same deal, just get really nice and close together there.
Engagement sessions used to be something that I would do for every single one of my couples, but I'm noticing that they're becoming a little less common, at least now. I'm not sure why that is, but it's something that I've definitely noticed. What an engagement session is an excuse for you to get out with your couple, to do photos of them, to get a little bit more comfortable with each other before the actual wedding day. So it kind of all depends on if your couple actually has a use for those photos or wants to do those photos. If they're both people that really are hiring you just to be a photojournalist for the day, there's a pretty good chance that they're not really going to want to do that session, that an engagement session, something that forced, feels a little bit weird. If you are talking with a couple that's a little more down that line, you can always suggest something like we actually go out and do an activity. They can go to the pub or have a picnic or whatever it might be, and you can just follow along and document. I found that to be very successful and a very good way to actually show people's true personalities, which is kind of cool that you're able to show up for that hour window and actually capture who they truly are. And I would say that the only way that I was able to do that with people that really did not want to do an engagement session was by coming up with something that they would just want to do had I not been there with a camera, and then coming and documenting it with them. And then if you are able to get them in front of your camera prior to the wedding day, selfishly, you get to build a little bit more portfolio with them, and you get to deliver them images that are not in their wedding attire, which I think are equally as valuable to the actual wedding day images in a lot of cases. And then you all get to become a lot more comfortable with each other going into the wedding day, that no longer are you the photographer that's arriving and you're meeting for the first time the morning of the wedding, that now you have some sort of rapport. And then the other benefit is that couples get a chance to actually see themselves in your photos, so they know if there's anything that they do weird that maybe they don't want to do, or if there's any constructive criticism to you as a photographer of what we really love, what we didn't quite love. It's always nice to have, and I honestly do welcome that before the actual wedding day, because going into the wedding day, that's kind of a one shot. You don't get to redo that, and the more information I can have on their expectations leading into the wedding day, the happier I am overall.
Engagement sessions, we literally just kind of go for a walk around. We pick a nice spot to begin and we just go from there. I would say that the 85mm prime is my go-to lens. For this shoot, you'll see a lot of my 35, which is on there right now. And I'm going to roll a little bit of the behind the scenes so you can hear what we talk about. Yeah, even if you want to come this way, just like a little bit more, like that's good. And then exactly the same thing you were just kind of doing there. Then we stopped at a fruit stand where the owner directs all the photos. He knows it. Do you want to join for? Really though, he doesn't let anyone else direct photos. He just this is his life. This is his passion, not fruit. If you ever absolutely have to shoot with direct sun, I just never have people looking directly at the camera. This is ridiculous. So good. And maybe put an arm around each other, get really nice and close. Walking shots I always shoot really fast because I always get awkward foot positioning. So take a lot of photos, pick the best ones. This is me on the piano, by the way. I don't like to brag, but I'm a pretty famous pianist. I might have you right about here. And if you just want to hold hands and just kind of look out that way. Yep. There's a lot of dynamic range in this scene, which kind of makes it feel not as cohesive as it possibly could, but I still really like the photos. All right, looks good. If you guys want to turn around and come back this way. Perfect. And yeah, you can look at each other. Only regret on this shoot is that we didn't spend a whole lot of time in the streets because we had so many amazing scenic locations to get to. Might have you guys in the center of this ridiculous, incredible scene that we just have all to ourselves. So just in the center of the one thing we did do really well was time this in a way that not a lot of other tourists and people were around while we were taking photos, which is my favorite time to take photos. Let's go there. And you can look at each other.
One thing that I touched on in the intro section is being an introverted photographer. And I really do believe that wedding photography is kind of the perfect job for an introverted person. It might seem counterintuitive. It seems like you're controlling people, you're doing family photos, you're yelling and screaming and getting all kind of, you're herding cats essentially. And as it turns out, 90% of the day is just kind of all candid, that it's whatever you make it, that you're setting up the shots, you're doing those detail shots, that you are in the vicinity of people for the entire day. But most of the day is just going to be pure photojournalism, that you're just kind of trying to make the best you can out of whatever situation you're currently in. So I have personally found that by being an introverted photographer and finding myself in the wedding space, that yes, there are definitely times, specifically during family formals and during the wedding party shots, that really are out of my element. But the rest of the day, I feel very natural after going to a few weddings. The first couple of engagement sessions were very difficult. It took me a long time to get myself to a point that I was comfortable just talking to people and setting up shots and asking them what to do for poses. We're going to talk a little bit more about posing within this tutorial, but there really were a few kind of key things that took me from making okay work that I was kind of happy with to actually creating work that I was very happy with and really enjoying the overall experience as well, which was something that in the beginning was very difficult for me, that I didn't really leave any session being like, wow, that was really great, this is what I was born to do. But pretty quickly after the first maybe 10, 15 sessions, I really did start to get comfortable and I really did start to feel like it was a lot of fun. So don't take introversion as a negative getting into this industry. Know that you will start to feel at home eventually, and it will get there. It just takes a little bit more time. It's not the end of the world, and you can create amazing work. And if somebody's telling you that like this isn't really the career for you, they're wrong. People will always tell you that. They'll always try to tear you down and not let you become successful. So don't stress too much about that. And now we're gonna get a coffee and we're going to head back to the wedding. So the getting ready section of the day happens pretty much at most weddings, I would say. There are elements that I'm seeing disappearing over time. The getting ready and the details, I would say, is one of those elements that, looking back even 5 years ago, I do a lot less, and my clients request that I do a lot less, that they're not looking for 5 shots of the dress hanging. They want that one single shot. And a lot of my couples don't even care about that, and they tell me that in the first meeting, that they're like, why do I want a shot of my dress hanging? That's weird. So really get a good understanding of what your couple's desires are for their wedding photography in the first meeting or the first phone call or Skype call or whatever it might be, because it really will set you up that if you walk in right now and we start photographing all kinds of details and that is not something that my couple wants, immediately there's going to be a little bit of a disconnect there, and the trust element isn't going to be as strong as it could be. Whereas if you show up and you know exactly what they want you to do, that you can just get right into that and you can just kind of keep the day and the momentum going. My big thing for wedding days is to never add any additional stress and to try to solve any possible problems. That if you see something arising, if you can solve that without telling one of the members of the couple, if you can solve that with the venue staff or maybe with the mother of the bride or somebody that's not the couple, always recommend it. So now we're gonna go in, we're going to do some details. Another thing that I really like to do at this stage is that typically as a new human being to all these people, I don't want to just arrive in the scene and just immediately start taking photos and candids of everyone. I feel like that's a little bit too much of a hard start. So I go in and I actually photograph. I'll do some flat lays, or I'll photograph the dress or the shoes or whatever it might be. But I always want to make my presence known and to make hopefully a couple of the members kind of involved in that. So they start becoming a little bit more comfortable to the fact that there is this random weird photographer in the room that's eventually going to be taking photos of them. And once you make that transition from photographing details like the rings or the shoes or whatever it might be to photographing the people, it feels a lot more natural and it's more of a soft start. And maybe one more thing, I think it's very important to be conscious of what people are currently looking like, that if they're half done with makeup or their hair's done and their makeup's not done, don't just start grabbing candids of them. Wait until everyone's pretty much completely finished, I would say, as far as hair and makeup goes. Bride included, that I'll very rarely, if ever, photograph kind of forward-facing shots of a bride getting her makeup done, because it's always half done. So I'll usually start the gallery, or I'll usually start my photo coverage maybe with some more abstract shots of over the shoulder, kind of some hair, and not just direct shots of somebody's face that isn't quite finished in makeup yet. And then I'll usually ask the makeup artist and the hairstylist, like, whenever they're done, let me know, I want to come in. And usually what they'll do is they'll just grab some powder or even just a naked brush and just like do some kind of fake brush strokes. And while I know it's not a real moment, it's a staged moment, it is basically, it saves you from just photographing somebody getting their makeup done for 35 minutes, because I don't know when makeup's finished usually. So it's much easier to come in and just kind of make that a known thing, to be like, hey, can you let me know when you're finished, and I'll come in and I'll grab the 3 or 4 shots that I need. And then you start the gallery strong, I think is also important, that when they're clicking through their final image gallery, if it starts with a bunch of photos that they're just not super comfortable with themselves in, it's going to set off their experience for the rest of the gallery. So start really strong when possible, and I would even say include less images from the getting ready in order to make the images that are there extra strong.
You've never even been to the wedding yet. This is the first you're seeing of a wedding really in this in this tutorial so far. So arriving at the wedding day, what I typically do first is I will go to wherever the reception space is or the ceremony space, and I'll be there a little bit earlier than I'm telling the couple that I'm going to arrive at. And if the space is completely finished, I'll talk with the florist, the venue, to make sure that nothing else is going in the room. I'll actually do all my room photos first, so I don't have to rush to get them before guests come back after the ceremony and start going into the space. That is kind of one concern that I usually have. I want that big empty room shot, and it's kind of hard to get when you're the only photographer at a wedding sometimes. So I'll go do that first before the couple expects me to arrive. And then I will head over, and if it's a male-female wedding, usually the female side of things is a lot more of an experience as far as getting ready goes. So I spend a lot more time there, and I'll maybe spend 10-15 minutes with the guys. When I first arrive, I do detail photos first, so I don't just appear and then instantly have a camera in front of everyone's face. Another thing that I think is very important that I don't hear enough about kind of on the internet is that when a bride, or even the bridesmaids or the mom or whoever is getting their makeup done, if they're kind of half finished, there's no reason really to photograph that. I'll photograph from the back and do some artistic or some abstract shots, but I'm not going to really photograph the entire process of them getting their makeup on. I think it's a little bit weird. So I will just arrive and ask them like, hey, any details you'd like me to take photos of? Usually we've talked a little bit about kind of expectations with it, I guess, leading up to this, that if I know that they only want photojournalism, usually I'm arriving a lot tighter to the end of getting ready. And I would probably also stay a little bit later into the reception, because that would be a little bit more important for that couple typically. For lighting, I'm always putting people just in good window light. I'll walk into the room and I'll actually turn off all of the lights in the room if they're having any sort of weird color casts, and I will use the window light as my main light. If that's not possible, I might add some flash, but usually I would say in 98% of circumstances, I can always get away with ambient. And then at the end of the getting ready section, I'll usually do just a few photos with the bride, or a few photos maybe with the people that are there if they're completely ready to go. And from then we head on to the guys getting ready. There is no official rule whether you go to the guy's place first or the girl's first, or I guess this is also speaking to a male-female wedding. If it's a same-sex wedding, a lot of my couples choose to get ready in the same room or in the same space and do kind of a first look somewhere within their home or hotel or whatever it might be. And if I can give any sort of kind of time frames for it, usually I would say if we have 20 minutes with the guys, that's enough, assuming that everybody's there and everybody knows that they're going to be getting ready at that specific time. And also all the presets that you're seeing are presets that are already out. So even though that's at October 1st, it's actually out over on the members site. And for the girls' side of things, usually I like to have about an hour with them total that I can do some detail photos. Things tend to run. The schedule isn't as specific usually as far as hair and makeup goes, that there's an approximate time that they're going to be finished, but sometimes that doesn't line up with the guys. It's usually you show up, they know to do this. Sometimes it even comes down to the fact that you have to arrive a little bit too early, so they'll actually get dressed and then they'll get like undressed and back into their regular clothes just to hang out for a bit. And that's not something that's super uncommon. That's something that I actually unfortunately encounter a little bit, and it feels weird from a photojournalistic mindset, but it makes the wedding day possible as far as photography goes. And the same rules kind of apply, that you're just looking for great light in a space, and whatever good light you can find, that's kind of where I camp out and make most of my shots. Moving into another wedding day, just to give you a little more visibility. If I arrive at a house, usually there are a lot of details around that house that I want to be capturing, things with the wedding date on the calendar and things that actually mean something. When I'm in a hotel room, I don't really care too much about that stuff. Also, this is maybe out of scope of this video, but I also do video as well as photography. So I do hybrid coverage, which is very much a topic for another video. One thing you'll encounter in homes is you see this kind of green tint on all the photos and all the videos. That's because all the light is bouncing off the grass that's right outside of the window. So one easy way to get around that is to just physically go outside. All right, so walking into this room, it's very apparent that there is just a lot of bad light on the dress. So I'm going to turn the light off, and then I'm going to use my Godox V1 to light this up and get the shot that I actually want. All right, off-camera flash set to 1/16.
+3. That on. This guy. Actually, the whitest thing in the room is kind of this chaise lounge. And I'm going to try to use this as a main light, using a chaise lounge as a softbox.
The direction of light could be better, but there's no real better way to make that happen within this environment, and you never really know what you're walking into on a wedding day.
If you want to know where the best natural light actually is, it's actually just on the toilet. So if somebody's over here sitting on the toilet, they're perfectly lit. Unfortunately, I don't think that's something that I can ask really anyone here to do.
Nance, do you want the wand?
A little bit of nervous energy today. It looks like it's going to rain. If you don't have a weather program like AccuWeather is great for in Canada, it'll pretty much give you a minute-by-minute readout on when it's actually going to rain. So today it's going to rain, allegedly, from 4:20 to 4:40, and the ceremony's at 5. So I'm going to send out some emails and see maybe if I can get them to bump the time up to finish the rain at 4:30 so that we're not too nervous.
Walking over to the guys now and taking some photos of the trees, as you do. You can't see that one because it wasn't very good. I don't want to show it to you.
You'll be the test subject. Boom.
So this is my subtle preset on this image, and this is the image straight at a camera. Not sure what type of sorcery Nikon is up to, but they're making some really incredible files. One of the reasons this image actually comes together is there's a little tiny piece of sun poking through, and they're actually looking directly into the sun. It's over my back shoulder. Usually I'm the opposite way, looking for some way to bounce that sun, but today things are different. I like to switch things up. I don't ever really shoot photography with a 35 since the Porsche trip really was the last time I could think of that. There's a full documentary on my YouTube channel if you're interested in cars and driving across San Francisco all the way back to our hometown of Kitchener, Ontario, Canada. Which is funny for Mike's car because he had to bump start it the entire 7 days home because race car. Back to the wedding day. Here we are, the golf cart section of the wedding day. I'm gonna take about 15 frames here, and one of them is good. Got one. I prefer to take photos while things are kind of happening. I was waiting for them to show up kind of in this natural frame, but I also would have taken a great reaction in a less good frame overall as a photo as well. On a wedding day, you don't really know how things are going to shake out, so I would rather just overshoot and make sure that I have enough coverage rather than waiting for that like one exact perfect shot to line up like street photography style, because if it doesn't come together, then I don't have anything. I'm going to do a quick round of detail shots now that everything's all set up, but I know that my couple want more photos of people, specifically their daughter and them, rather than the stuff, so I'm not going to selfishly spend a lot of time here. By selfishly, I mean I know that you get into magazines whenever you kind of overshoot details because that's all they want to see. So I am much more in the mind space of making my couple happy with the photos rather than potentially getting them publicity from their wedding.
So getting into wedding photography, I really wanted to second shoot. I thought that the way to get into wedding photography was by working for somebody else. And I pretty quickly realized that I emailed everyone in town that I could possibly find, as well as everyone just kind of outside of my direct city as well. And not a whole lot of people got back to me, and 0 people got back to me with offers for second shooting jobs. And I was a little bit discouraged, and it was a bit of a learning curve to get over the fact that I actually just had to go out and I had to just start building my own portfolio. And if I can give you one piece of advice right now, it is to not worry too hard about what other people can do for you, and to just get out there and to just start working on your own portfolio. The big thing with weddings is basically that if you go out and you shoot that dream portfolio right now and you get started on it, you're going to start attracting your ideal clients a lot faster. And those ideal clients that you are attracting are going to be attracted by the work that you're creating and that you're putting on your website. So by creating the work that you want to exist, it will mean that those couples are coming to you looking for that style of work, which means that you basically get to create your dream portfolio every single weekend, hopefully, if that all comes true. So if people are not letting you second shoot for them, if they're not getting back to your emails, know that I was in the same boat. I sent out so many emails and no one ever got back to me. So don't worry about that part of wedding photography right now. Just worry about getting out there to build your own portfolio, and hopefully that this is at least a little push of motivation. I'll keep hammering this home throughout the rest of the tutorial, but it's definitely an important piece that took me way too long to understand and to learn when I was getting into wedding photography. Moving into the first look, usually the way that it goes, if I'm at a male-female wedding, typically I'll have the groom standing with his back facing off into some foliage or something, which is a little bit weird and kind of a mean thing to play on somebody right before they see their future wife for the first time. And then I'll have the bride come up behind, tap him on the shoulder, or I'll have the bride stop a little bit short and have him turn around, and she just kind of will cue that. The way that I do first looks, for the most part, is I find a good piece of light, so something even like what we're in right now, that I know when the groom turns around that he's not going to be just facing into the sun. You're basically setting up kind of a little tiny on-location portrait session. So when they turn around, you want them to be in the best light. I am always photographing the groom's face, his reaction first, and then going around to the bride. If you have two photographers with you, then it makes it easy because you can kind of both focus on one. But the groom's reaction is usually the one that I focus the most on. I also focus on this during the ceremony as well, when the doors open at the end of the aisle for the first time, but we'll get to that in a minute. Then typically after the first look, because they've just seen each other, there's an energy and an excitement in the air. Usually we'll do a quick photo session just with the couple, and it might be 5 minutes total before all friends, family, and anyone that's there kind of arrive to just like kind of hang out with them. Then we can do family photos if we want, or photos with the bridal party or whatever it might be, but use that energy right after the first look to get some images and to get those romantic images where they just really are hyper genuinely excited to have seen each other, and that all of the nerves are melting away, and that if you're there to capture that, I feel like it's a pretty good moment.
All right, here we are in Mexico, and Victoria is coming down the stairs to, I guess, not really surprise Hugo. He's pretty aware that she's coming with all of us pointing cameras at him. I would say that the first look is definitely maybe one of the more forced emotional moments of the day. So there is an element of kind of weird strangeness to it. But usually people are pretty into it, and they if they don't want to see each other for the first time at the ceremony, they know that this is kind of a necessary weird part of the day. I'm actually going to get Hugo's reaction on video. I'm working with Tim at this wedding, and Tim is doing both photography and video coverage, and I am just going to do Hugo's reaction on video. It was also important to have somebody running crowd interference up at the top of the stairs to make sure nobody in bathing suit tried to chase Victoria down the stairs. So there it is. It is that simple. Put your couple in good light so that when they turn around, that they're not just going to be facing into the blinding sun, and everything should be good. Also be on an 85 or something a little bit longer, so you're not just all at 3 feet away from them during that moment, because that'd be a little bit weird too. And cue the first look. Jessica running down the aisle at 74 miles an hour, about to touch Nick with the force of 3 Gs. That happened at least double or triple the speed that first looks usually happen at, so I'm gonna hustle over here to get a few different angles because I'm all by myself today, and I need to make it look like I'm 5 people. I'm stuck in the chairs now. Please send help. And Outback Steakhouse. You didn't think I got anything, but I got a lot. I'm everywhere. Whoopah. All right, let's start with a few here. You guys look amazing.
Thank you.
And everything looks so good.
Contrary to popular belief, this is the only image that you for sure have to get at every single wedding. If you don't get it, people will complain.
Moving into the ceremony, I'm actually going to change my lens to a 70-200. It's what I use for pretty much every ceremony, maybe with the exception of if it's a smaller 10, 12 person wedding, I might stay on the 85. But to have the additional reach of the 70-200, which again, you can rent if you can't afford to buy one because they're very expensive. It's definitely the lens I would say for ceremony coverage, just because you can stay completely out of the way and you can get all the shots that you need without becoming the center of attention.
Because I have a lot of space to move around, I'm actually doing something that I don't usually do, and I kind of am parking myself right behind the officiant so I can get more of a centered shot. I'm just going to kind of experiment with this for a little bit, but I do know that whenever Jasmine starts coming down the aisle that I'm actually going to have to get reaction shots, so I'm going to have to move at that point. Even though I am the only person here, I find more comfort in being on a 70-200. While I love the images from an 85 or a 50, I think just the flexibility of being able to get kind of everywhere at once with a 70-200 without having to run around the ceremony location is a huge benefit to my couples, because I know that all of them are pretty much just after like primarily candid coverage with maybe a 10 or 15 minute posed photo session. So the more images I can get in good light right now, the happier they're going to be with their final image gallery. I think one of the most important things you can do as a photographer during a ceremony is to just be as respectful as possible and to not stand directly in front of the mom as her daughter's coming down the aisle, and to be very aware of that. And while I know that you could probably get an amazing shot shooting at like 16 millimeters laying on the ground while the bride comes down the aisle, I don't think that's something that anyone should ever be doing, because it really does just direct all attention at you, when the ceremony specifically and the rest of the wedding day entirely should be about the couple, and all eyes should be on them rather than you doing weird stuff to try to get photos and be experimental and create work essentially to impress other wedding photographer friends on Instagram. Because a lot of my couples, they're a lot happier, and I can see through the download stats that the more experimental I get and the more interesting things that I think I do that make me happy usually result in less downloads, or even no downloads in some cases, in the actual wedding day album. That said, I do think that it's important to also be creating some work for yourself, but don't focus the entire day on just curating Instagram content for yourself. Really put the couple at the number one spot. They're the ones that have hired you to come and create this work for them. So do the best by them, not the best for you personally. Going into the first kiss, I'm always just kind of like, I lock my focus point and then I just stand there for like a minute and a half. It's something that I haven't really been able to get over, because I do know when it's coming, but I also don't want to just be like putting my camera up quickly to try to capture it. So I just stand here like a little tiny statue and get as much as I possibly can. It's also really challenging to, even if the officiant tells you where they're going to go during the first kiss, you always have to kind of start tight and get a little bit wider as they kind of go to frame. At least in my experience, that's been the best. Also, you probably noticed, but I didn't mention it, I changed back to my Nikon D850 for the ceremony so that I have 2 cards of backup. And now that they're coming back down the aisle, I'm back on the Z6 with a 24mm lens to kind of get everybody and also the architecture and everything into the shot, because I think there's a lot of cool stuff going on here.
All right, welcome to the ceremony. The ceremony is, I don't know if it's the hardest or the easiest. It's a part of the wedding day. That's my official review of photographing a ceremony. A lot of my frames are vertical because I do try to minimize as many distractions as I can in the frame. So if I am shooting a horizontal image, there's going to be a lot of people's faces, and just like 3 of those people's faces not facing into the scene, I feel like really distract from an image, and I have to get into cropping and all kinds of craziness like that. I would rather just shoot vertical, get the people in kind of full focus and get full length shots of everyone coming down the aisle. I feel like this is a time to just kind of document as the day goes, rather than trying to create anything like really crazy and artistic. I'm not going to set up an off-camera flash here to do anything, and I don't suggest that you do either. There's actually an off-camera wedding day in this exact same space where it was nighttime and I had to shoot everything at 5000 ISO. So if you're interested in seeing this in less ideal conditions, there is a video on my YouTube channel, and I think there's like 25 or 26 full wedding days now. So you can get your fill of the wedding days, and a lot of them involve music videos for some reason. I'm not sure why, but I can't change them now because they're online, and that's how they live forever. You can't update videos here, unfortunately. That's my review. Back to the wedding day. I was photographing off to the left there, but my 360 camera just kind of stays pointed straight. It's one of the many benefits of the 360 camera. The main negative is that it takes me about 100 hours now to do, and maybe not 100, but it takes me a long time to do these full wedding days with the 360 camera, because I have to reframe everything and I have to first collect all the footage and put it back to you. Don't care. You're here. You're watching the video. I shouldn't complain to you. I appreciate you being here. Here's all the images of everybody coming down the aisle. Again, as I said, just basic documentary coverage. Full lengths are nice. Vertical frames to keep everybody out of just kind of the sides looking weird, or looking at different people, or distracting from the scene, or even just looking at their watch or their phone or whatever. Also, I lied to you. Those are not full length shots. For the guys, I rarely, if ever, get the full length shot because it's not really as important. For the girls, I try my best to get the full dress because I feel like they care about that. I feel like all of the interest in a guy's suit really kind of ends just above the belly button. So usually that's kind of where my frames end with them, whether I'm shooting vertical or whether I'm shooting horizontal. I never loved just kind of standing up here at the front, but it's kind of a thing that I have to do. I would much prefer to be hidden somewhere, but this is unfortunately the frame that I have to get from everybody because it's the shot, so I can't not be here. All right, as I said, full length-ish for the girls when possible. Here's a full length. Not quite. Almost. Getting closer.
I feel like that's kind of a more proper crop though. With the guys, I'm definitely a lot tighter than that. I'll let this roll for a minute. So you just kind of see the things. This is one of the things that helped me, I think, the most when I was first getting started. I watched Jerry Gionis do a few of these that just had a person just kind of rolling coverage. He didn't talk over it at all. It was just like as the wedding day happened. And it made me a lot, I don't know, just happier going into a wedding day, knowing what a wedding actually looked like. Because prior to photographing a wedding, I had not been to a wedding since I was like essentially this kid's age 5 or so. This is me shooting over to the left of the groom, just his reaction. I know that Tim is getting the shot of the kids, and I want to do my best to get the groom's reaction shot when he first sees his bride for the first time. So I got that shot, and I'm going to get another shot while they're out in kind of the bright sun. Again, capitalizing on those times where the light is bad, I'm going to just photograph whatever is good or whatever is possibly good within that scene, while kind of catching a few safe shots to make sure at least that I have something in case I need it. So this is photographing over here. It's kind of cool that the camera stays just pointed that way. You can see what I didn't see in real life. And a lot of the time I'll actually shoot kind of over my shoulder. So if I have to like peer around a corner, I'll be kind of photographing the groom like no look style and waiting for the bride to come around, especially if it's a short aisle, so that I can just quickly flip around and get a shot, since in this case, like her dad are kind of the most important. I know Tim's up front there, so I'm going to do a little walksy down the aisle. I feel like this is the only time that I really kind of go in that front aisle space is when everyone's standing. I feel more comfortable doing it. Getting this shot here, Tim's getting the close-ups of people's faces. And I like this shot because it kind of frames everyone and it shows that there's something going on. Once everyone sits down, it's just kind of like, I don't know, it's boring, I guess. It's a very ceremony-esque shot. Here, I feel like there's more going on, so I do the best that I can to photograph everything in that moment that I possibly can. Getting shots, my key shots to get now, whether I'm shooting photo or video, are usually kind of just a wide shot of all the girls standing, a wide shot of all the guys, or if it's a guy's girl side or guy's side, whatever it is. I want everybody standing on the left and everybody standing on the right in kind of a one photo. And I'm usually cropped in just on the groomsmen or bridesmaids rather than including the bride and groom in them. Then I'm doing all variations that I can possibly think of. That it's not really something that I write down. It's just that I want a shot of the like good shots close up of the groom looking at the bride in this case and the bride looking at the groom. So I'll kind of go from side to side, as you'll see, and I'll get those shots. And I do my best to, I'm fortunate because I know a lot of the people that officiate, the officiants, the priests, the ministers, and I kind of know where their jokes are. A lot of them kind of say the same things over and over again. So I know when they're kind of gearing up for a punchline. And when I know that that's coming, I get myself in a position to first get that one shot that I want of the bride and that one shot of the groom. So I kind of wait for those, and that's the thing that just comes with experience and time. But usually you can kind of read a ceremony and you can get a feel for somebody, and if they're a little bit of a joke teller, this is such a weird 360 camera angle, little face crunch there. You can usually get a feel for it, and you can usually kind of predict when people are going to laugh and smile so that you're not just like behind your camera pointed at people waiting the entire ceremony. And because as I kind of punched in earlier to talk about, the video guy is in the center of the aisle here, but we actually talked about it before, and I was like, can you just give me the first like 45 seconds and then post up? Or in a better situation, a better life case would be if they were able to just have a longer lens and to sit at the far back with a tall tripod above everyone on a 7200. That is the most ideal, obviously, but not everyone comes prepared to do that. From this angle here, this is my shot. I am all the way in at 200, and then I actually go into crop mode within my camera, so I'm shooting kind of at 300. I feel like I'm a South Park character whenever I can see myself in the 360 frame. For the first kiss, I'm always focus point and focus locked on exactly where they are, and I'm just sitting waiting for that to happen. And then I just grab the frames that I need, and then they walk back down the aisle usually. And to give you a sense of how I'm handling that bright light that's behind, because they're in the shade and it's just bright sunny day outside, and specifically on that piece behind them, is that I'm just doing the best I can with it, because it's really a photographically challenging situation. But now it's a little bit cloudy, and it makes my life just a little bit easier. And I would say working with a video team, this is probably the most challenging part of the entire wedding day, is just when they're coming back down the aisle. Tim also already feels awkward about it. Kind of stepped into his usual spot and is like, oh, can't be there, because they're going to track back. So I'm going to do the best I can to kind of get that shot from where I'm at and dodge this person with their phone. And just kind of do the best that I can in that scene. And Tim's getting that wide shot of them kissing, fortunately, because I missed it. That's why it's important to have, well, I got it, but I got it from way too close. So that's why it's important to have a second photographer. And if you are a second photographer, that's why it's important to just not stand on top of your lead shooter if you are photographing, and be in a different spot, and if possible, be on a slightly different lens. Like if you're both shooting a 7200 and you're both at the exact same spot, there's really no need for that.
All right, no rain. Flowers up here, lake out there. Wedding about to happen here. I am going to stay on my 85mm lens here. I could go to my 7200, but I feel like the shot over here isn't really that good. And the shot that I'm going to want is here, but I'm not going to want the extension cord going to the DJ down the hill there to be too much in the shot, so I'm happy to let the background kind of entirely go. So I'm going to do my best to stay centered right about here.
When the bride is coming in the aisle, not right now, I feel like my stance is always to be as off center as possible, just so I'm never the person that is attracting the most attention. So in an outdoor ceremony space, hey man, I can be a little bit more centered, and I can be kind of behind the actual altar. Also shooting AFC, autofocus continuous, always single point AFC. I don't really use groups. I'm starting to experiment a little bit with it, but for the most part, I feel like I just have the most control over a single point AFC, and it makes my life a lot happier just knowing that I'm going to get the shot and nothing's going to happen that can be outside of my control, which I think is really important for something that's kind of a once in a lifetime moment. But also I feel like on a wedding day, there's a lot of different once in a lifetime things, and I feel like that's anything to do with photography, that you're always capturing something that as soon as that moment is gone, it's just gone. So always you want to be prepared for it, and you want to be able to capture it in the best way you possibly can. All right, good light behind Iris and her daughter walking down the aisle. That really works well, but the other direction on Justin doesn't really work that well. So I'm switching to my second body, which is a wider lens, 35, to at least capture a little bit more, so the intricacies of bad light aren't as pronounced. When it's sunny and I know it could get cloudy, I kind of play this game where I don't really shoot as many photos as I usually would when it is sunny, and then I kind of give it maybe another 3 minutes. And if it gets cloudy, then I'll essentially just shoot all the content that I would usually shoot within an entire ceremony in that like single cloud. But today it stayed sunny, which is awesome because it didn't rain, but it does make things a little bit more difficult as far as just making it look like a perfect magazine spread. It's not quite that today, but it is what it is, and I documented it the best way that I possibly could within the given scenario today. Here's a quick little comparison. So the 85 that I was shooting from way back, if I have the space and ability to go way back, I would prefer a shot from a telephoto lens that looks like a wide angle than a wide angle lens up super close. So here it is with the wide angle lens. Here it is with the 85. Again, the 35. Here's the 85. I like the 85 shot a heck of a lot better than the 35 shot. Just something to think about if you're out there in the field photographing weddings and you're like, wow, 85 is way too telephoto, but you made a wide angle if you try hard enough. The part where I actually come up to the front, near the front, or at least I am the closest to the couple, is usually for the ring exchange. And I've never, maybe once in my entire career of wedding photography, I've had like a bang on, like, wow, that was a great ring exchange photo. It is one of those photos you're going to try over and over and over again, and you're never going to get the perfect one. In this instance, Iris actually covered the rings with her bouquet, and it's not something that anyone's thinking about. And at the end of the day, I don't even know if it's that important of a photo for couples to have. I would say that it's very rare that photo ends up if I am printing an album. So take that for, I guess, what it's worth, but that is my experience in the value, I guess, of that shot. So don't stress out too hard if it just doesn't ever go as planned exactly. Like, don't crawl over people or run in front or behind the couple to make the shot happen. Because in my experience, at least, it's not the most important shot of the entire wedding day. The first kiss, though, is important, I think, to people. And that does end up in wedding albums. So do a good job of it and talk with the coordinator before. In this case, Tracy, I believe her name was. We talked and she was like, I'm going to hop out of the way. And she actually coached the couple to smile at each other first while they gave her a second to get out of the way so she didn't actually have to just straight sprint. And it worked out really well, and their daughter came and joined them. And I think that worked out Awesome. I'm quite happy with the results. And I'm always happy when a story actually comes together in real life rather than me coaching it into the actual wedding day. Here we go back to the telephoto lens makes a better wide angle lens, or at least a more interesting one in my opinion. And I am way back because I have the space to do so. And as they come down the aisle, I am kind of starting with more depth of field, and as they get closer to me, I'm actually dialing it back so that I'm getting kind of a variety of different things. I personally really love the look at 1.4, but I know that that's not something that everyone is going to agree with. So I'll shoot a few at 2.2 to make sure that I get more, or 2.8 or whatever, just because I know that, well, a lot of the images are important for me to enjoy. It is more important for my couple to enjoy. And because we haven't spent our entire lives together, I don't really 100% exactly know what they want, but I do have a pretty good idea most of the time.
Moving into family photos, you can either stay on the 70 to 200 or you can go back to your 85. I find that shooting images, I know that these are the key images for a number of family members, and I know that they are the ones that are going to be passed down over time. So I really do, even though they might just seem like like we have to do these, I feel like they are something that wedding photographers should take a little bit more seriously and make sure that they are as good as they can possibly be. So I try to keep the environment as relaxed as I possibly can. Usually it's right after the ceremony, we will go and we'll do the family photos first so that family can go back to cocktail hour. And I get everybody in a big group and we just essentially start with the largest group available. We put them together and then we work down smaller groups from within that. The easiest way is to ask your couples for a list of the photos that they would like, the family photos that they would like. Usually in the first meeting or the first phone call, I kind of put out this expectation that if you have a lot of family groupings, please give a list to myself and a list to somebody that knows who everyone is so that they can help and they can call out names. I would say in that case, even if we have 30, 40 people and different combinations within that we can typically get through that in maybe 10 to 15 minutes total. It's a lot faster of a process. If you approach it without a list and you have one in your mind, you can download my suggested list. There's a link in the description below. And that works well most of the time, but there is a potential that somebody might come in, like an aunt or a mother, that really just wants to direct the photo session, and then that session slowly becomes what they want, and they're calling out names and they're putting together groupings that really aren't that important for the couple to have, and that those photos we easily could have taken during cocktail hour or some other time. So to be a little bit more organized and to have a bit of a list to run from at this moment, I feel like is definitely a positive thing, and it will definitely make the session run as efficiently as it possibly can, and I'm kind of all about efficiency when it comes to this part of the day.
All right, looks good. And everybody have a look over here towards me.
Today we're lucky, it's cloudy, very easy to do these big family group shots. I'm actually shooting at f5.6, which is not something I do, but multiple layers of people, and got to keep everyone in focus. I use the 70-200 at this point because I like to be able to zoom around elements in the background rather than photoshopping them out or moving them. I just find the versatility in this circumstance is a lot better. Some of my most stressful moments, especially my early weddings, were definitely doing the family photos section of the day. It's a lot of people for me to organize, and it's it's not a thing that comes naturally to me. The main thing that I always want is a big patch of shade like everybody's in right now, even though the sun is kind of firing down the barrel of my lens a little bit. Everyone's faces are in the shade, so they're going to look as good as they possibly can. If you cannot find shade, have the sun at people's backs if possible. I guess it's always technically possible. The downside with that is if they're in the sun and the sun is at their backs, that if anyone's blonde or they have maybe a bald head, you're going to have some really difficult reflections to deal with. So that, I guess, comes with experience and knowing kind of where to expose, and to sometimes maybe underexpose, knowing that you're going to bring up and you're going to develop for the skin tones essentially in Lightroom. I usually shoot all these images at something like f2.8 or f4. So it's very important that I get everyone's eyes on the same plane of focus, which basically means that everybody stands side by side. I get everyone to angle in a little bit towards the couple typically, and then just kind of smile towards me. And once everyone's set up and in the spot that they think they're going to be in, I do a quick scan to make sure no one's holding sunglasses or holding a bag or a mask or something that shouldn't be there. So that's kind of my quick final scan. And after that, I will just start taking photos. I typically would take maybe 5 to 10, 15 photos of each individual combination, knowing that sometimes people blink and sometimes they alternate blinks, and I would rather just choose a frame with everybody smiling, facing the camera with their eyes open, than trying to build one by photoshopping heads around in post-production. So I have no problem if there's 15 people in the photo. I'm going to probably take 15, 20 images to make sure I get that one clean shot. If there are too many people and I have to add a second or a third row, what I'll do is I'll bring my f-stop down. So I'll start out at 2.8 if everybody's in the same plane of focus, and then maybe a second row I'll go down to 5.6, and then if there's a third row, probably down to f8. And that makes sure that everybody's in good, sharp focus.
All right, that's great. This way here. Everybody look at me. All right, a few more over this way.
Family photos are always a little bit of a struggle when there's lots of people around, so just do the best you can. You're not trying to do anything revolutionary, just clean photos. This is a photo chairs.
One thing that I've actually noticed with couples when it comes to the bridal party sessions is that they have been shrinking in terms of both numbers. 10 years ago, bridal parties used to be like 14 people on each side. It was a little nuts. It is shrinking in terms of numbers, which makes it a lot easier to work with, as well as expectations, at least as far as my couples go, tend to be getting a little bit smaller. That it used to be that we would have 2 hours to do the bridal party session and all kinds of different creative combinations. And now they kind of are just looking for more of the basics, that they would like to have one nice photo with everyone, one photo that's maybe laughing, everybody's smiling, facing each other, and then a few more candid ones. And I feel like at that point, as long as you know that you have all those photos and they're all in good light, everybody's looking good, I am pretty comfortable saying that that's like all I officially need. And then asking the couple, like, do you guys want to do more photos at the bridal party? And if the answer is no, bridal party is free to go. And that's usually, again, maybe a 10 to 15 minute experience total.
All right, so my must-have shots, this looks like a lot of text, but it's not really a lot of text when you put it in real life because it's real life and it's not text. That was a bad joke. I didn't know where that was going. Basically, what I do is I start with the full wedding party smiling face in the camera. I make sure everyone has their flowers level. Usually I talk kind of belly button height and make sure that no one has them kind of up in front of their face and then like way down too low or whatever. Just a balanced, boring image. Everybody's smiling, looking good. Take a lot of frames of that so that you don't get anyone blinking, or if you do, that you can just go to the next shot rather than photoshopping something together similar to the family photos. After that, I just get them to all look and smile and laugh at each other. It's super awkward and everybody laughs from the awkward and uncomfortableness of it. And then I kind of do that same breakdown with both sides of the wedding party. So whoever wants to go first, I'll begin with them. Usually I'll structure it that if, say, for instance, it's a bride, she has 6 bridesmaids, I'll bring those 3 of the bridesmaids over to the other side and I'll just do kind of a group shot. Again, same deal, smile, face camera, then interact with each other, move over to side number 2, do the exact same thing, look at the camera, smile, interact with each other. And then individuals as well is something that I find is pretty important, that if you just do a quick little, like almost assembly line style, that the bride, groom, basically every individual wedding party member on their side in a photo with them, as well as I ask if there's any other smaller groups, if they went to school with a couple of the girls or the guys or whatever, or if there's kind of mixed sets from other sides that they would like a group photo together. I'm pretty customizable in that time. So what does that look like in real life? You're about to find out.
And everyone look over this way here. Hold your flowers down a little lower. That's good there. Perfect. And can I make everybody just like kind of walk towards me over here and just pretend that you're just like going for a casual walk in a parking lot? Yeah, just look at each other. Could maybe 2 of the girls come to the other side just to kind of balance it out? Yeah, and Ava, you're in. Perfect. Hold your flowers down like a little bit lower. That's good there.
These are all my safe shots just in case it starts to rain. That way we have kind of everything that I need to at least tell the proper story of their wedding day and get them all those key shots. Again, when all the family members and all the key individuals are around, I'm always shooting candidates, especially when I'm in good light. And today is also good light right now in this specific direction. Always shooting into the sun so that you get that nice warm kind of wraparound halo and stay away from the bad sun on people's faces. All right, so for the formal section of this, as you can see reflected in the glass behind them, you're already kind of seeing a lot of the chandelier and everything. Ideally, I would like to not have any real reflections in the glass, but after a few test frames, I realized that it's actually kind of adding a little bit of depth to the image that wouldn't otherwise exist. They'd kind of be just floating in black space, which is not the most ideal photo. So I kind of like the reflections in this case, and I just have to be conscious to hide myself so that I'm not just like standing beside them in all of their wedding photos in the reflections. That's something to be super conscious about when you're photographing into glass at night, which is again kind of like the worst case situation, but there's really no other great option. This is a warm option because it's very cold out right now, and it is an option that there's just not a lot of people around. I've stopped down a little bit, but I'm staying at 5000 ISO, so I'm kind of using my flash to mitigate that gap, to add a little bit more light to the scene and to be able to stay at 5000 ISO. I could go to 6400, but I feel like after 6400, I'm kind of getting into space that I haven't really processed files in this style. So now I know that 5000 is totally fine. 6400 would be totally fine. So I can next time in the future press a little bit higher, but I don't really like to experiment and just kind of shoot blindly before I've actually tested something properly. And honestly, going into this day, I didn't expect to have to be shooting at 5000 ISO.
For the couple session, by the time it actually comes to the wedding day, hopefully you've already done an engagement session together. Maybe you've already done that 5-minute session around the first look. They're going to be pretty comfortable at this point, and the couple session is actually a lot easier on the wedding day than a lot of people would expect. Engagement session's always a little bit weird. You're going out to a place to obviously take photos. Wedding day, same idea, to get some good photos. It becomes a lot easier just for people to actually be themselves with kind of the energy of the day, as well as all their friends and family around. So usually it's much easier to get real reactions and to break down that wall of when people show up to an engagement session. My goal is to just get them to be as normal as possible, as quickly as possible. On a wedding day, I feel like they just start pretty much normal to themselves and pretty comfortable. So couple session, wedding day, a lot easier. For couples photos, as well as just larger groups like family photos, bridal party, I always want to find good open shade like this, but there are different levels of goodness when it comes to this shade. So what I actually like to do is I'll show up to a scene and I'll turn on the selfie camera, and I'll actually do a quick little spin to see if there's any little light spots that I should be aware of, or where the best direction of light is. So right now, I would say that this is kind of the most optimal direction. Whereas if I'm facing backwards like this, I technically am in the shade, but as you can see, there's a pretty extreme color cast. Something like this is a little bit more natural. So just pull out your selfie cam, do a quick little spin whenever you think you're in the best light, and find the absolute best direction of light before your couple gets here and you're just like moving them around trying to figure it out. Then you can just figure it out in a couple of seconds yourself here.
Starting off with the most key image to get on a wedding day, just a full length image of the couple smiling, facing the camera. Make sure you get this shot at every single wedding. And this is a side-by-side comparison. So the left is obviously in the sun. The right is when a little cloud came over the sun and just gave that perfect light for a brief window. I personally very much prefer the one on the right, and I am always looking for that open shade whenever possible, or if I see a cloud coming, we really capitalize on that moment. So basically the only negative that I can see when it gets cloudy at this time of the day is that you lose a little bit of the saturation from everything. So if you're in a big open field, you're going to lose a little bit of that green because the sunlight just brings out the green in a different way when the sun gets all the way down to the root of the grass, and there's just more color there. But I think overall I guess like my thing is that I want to make people look as good as they possibly can. And soft light, open shade specifically when you're not in a forest. If you're in a forest and it's complicated, we'll talk about that in a few minutes here. But just like this nice shade with all these kind of neutral textures around that are bouncing light and making it nice and essentially building me a nice little studio with kind of all the direction of lighting that I want. I'm very happy to have that. And here's an example of when it gets a little bit sunnier. I think the main thing to do when it gets sunnier like this is to go a little bit wider. I'm still on my 7200 only because the video team's doing some work here, but I think by going really, really nice and wide, getting all that blue sky, getting those clouds in, really does kind of make a better image overall. And it's kind of the best that you can do within these conditions given. And if the couple's very small and they're not looking at the camera, like the worst case would be to just have them trying to face into the camera and smile and look at you when they're being bleached out by the sun. But if they are kind of small and just kind of hugging each other and just nice and close together, you can get away with a lot more. I don't know what the official gray area response is. If a video team's setting something up, I'm going to shoot it because I'm there on the wedding day. If I can get extra images, I don't care if it's their setups. I feel like morally, maybe there's some sort of artistic license there that people might get upset by that. Like if there's, say for instance, there for whatever reason there was 2 lead shooters, I probably wouldn't shoot what they're shooting because I feel like that's a conflict and more of a theft. But when the video team's just setting stuff up, I'm happy to photograph as much as I can within that scene that they're trying to do. And it's always going to look a lot different. And I'm kind of waiting for almost the in-between takes moments. So if they're asking them to do something, when they stop is when I usually am kind of taking those images when they're actually interacting with one another. All right, so the big thing for me is to photograph with as much light coming into the scene as possible. I don't want them facing into the forest. I want them facing out of the forest to get the best possible light. So in this case, they're backlit, which is nice. There's this huge piece of sun that's reflecting a little bit of light back, and we're kind of at the entrance to this forest here, so they're not just all in green. Now you might be asking yourself, what does it look like when you add off-camera flash to an outside scene in the forest and add an unnecessary light that doesn't exist in real life? This is what it looks like. And I'll leave it to you to decide whether you like it or not. It's a thing. I went for it today because I've been using a lot of off-camera flash, and I feel like it still fits within the gallery, the set of the images. On a normal wedding day, I just wouldn't bring this out of the blue and just use it out of absolutely nowhere. But I am happy with that image. I am probably a little bit more happy with the image without that flash. So we didn't spend too much time experimenting with that. If you are in a forest situation, it is the absolute best case to be near the exit of the forest. Something like this, it becomes a lot more difficult to work with color. This scene is a very nice scene, but the green cast was very difficult to work with in post-production. I feel like with wedding photography, it is very much an efficiency-based thing that if you're shooting a lot of really difficult scenes in post-production, it's going to become very incredibly more difficult than it could be when you're shooting in a scene like this, that everything is just good, that the light is coming in from the correct direction, and you're also getting a little bit of bounce back onto them. The images just come together a little bit better and a little bit easier, and they're pretty much ready to go straight out of camera. And while that's not a tip for, I guess, a couple sessions, I would say that that's a tip for pretty much the entire wedding day whenever possible. The downside is, though, that you don't always have control over situations, but when you do have control over situations, do the best you can with it. And an example of that is always shooting at golden hour when possible. Tell your couples in the first meeting that I'm going to bore you for 10 minutes during sunset. That's perfect. And if you want to turn around and slowly walk back towards us, and you guys can look at each other and pretend we're not just obviously here creeping, and be really unreasonably happy with each other. Awesome. Cool. And if you want to stand there for 1 second. Perfect. And even if you want to kind of close your eyes and kind of turn into them, I don't know if that's super weird, but I promise it looks like perfect magazine. Amazing. I might move you guys just to the back kind of center there. Right there's good. And if you just want to put both arms around each other and get really close one more time, you can dip her if you want. If you're feeling confident. Yeah. Next, we're going to be moving into an elopement, and during an elopement, the entire day is essentially the couple's session, which is awesome. That's good. Perfect. These are so good. Yeah, I'm super happy. I am absolutely overjoyed by the quality of light bouncing up off this apron and lighting the scene perfectly. All right, so you guys are good?
Yep.
You're all buckled in.
Great.
Jeff and the pilot are actually having a conversation about the fact that we might not be able to land on the island that Jeff has scouted through Jeff's scouting services, also available as an addition for your wedding. Addition. Anyways, it kind of cleared up, and we got to land on this island really close to the cliff there. Tails hanging over the edge. 10 out of 10 landing. Kept us all on the edge of our seats. This is a presidential portrait, again. Pete Souza, shout out. All right, getting out of the helicopter, I figured that I always get the limo scene, and I'm trying not to fall off this cliff and into the shallow water. Then trying also not to get hit by the propeller blades. And Jeff's just, I don't know what's Jeff up to? He's got his 360, Insta360 1X Pro, because he is a professional Insta360 videographer as well. So as an addition to his services, he'll deliver you a 360 video. That's actually a true statement, that he will give you that. And it's actually a really nice addition, and it's usually a surprise. I thought about staging that more properly, but I kind of like the way that it naturally, organically happened. Another dilemma. Do I like the silhouette or the in-color version? This is the same photo. All I moved was the shadow slider up quite a lot, and it makes a completely different image. So I'm okay to deliver both of these, I feel, because they are so different. And then, can I have you guys hold hands and maybe take a few steps towards us over here? I know that it's kind of challenging, but just go really slow and... yeah, if you like kind of walking through it. And you can look at each other and pretend you're having that great time that you were having. Now we have a basket. There's champagne. We have props. This is, again, doing video. You forgot that I was doing video, but I'm still doing video. Got to deliver that highlight. And I'm very happy they brought props because it makes it's basically something to do. We're trapped within, like, they don't really move more than like 20 feet in any direction. So the fact that we actually have something to do for at least a little bit of time, let the sun get a little bit lower. The downside with using a helicopter is that you have to get out before sunset. Otherwise you have to stay the night. And this would have been an amazing location once the sun went completely down.
The life of a billionaire.
Here's Jeff delivering donuts from the aircraft. The sun is kind of in the perfect spot right now. I'm just super happy with how this day has turned out. It has wildly exceeded all expectations, and the video looks amazing. This is with Nikon D lighting on extra high. And then they pose themselves in the best way ever. You can kind of see, sorry, I missed that. But this is with the 24. And then I was just like, hold that, don't move. I need to get my 85 and do it again. And it was two of my favorite photos from the day. And they were literally just kind of walking around. So sometimes you don't know exactly what you want until you see it. And then when you see it, you can kind of capitalize on it and make sure that you get it exactly as you want. I've stopped down a little bit. You'll see my settings in a second here. Just to get a little bit more depth of field, I figured that this was going to be one of those like images that end up getting blown up really large somewhere. I don't know if they'll blow it up or if I will for like a wedding show or something, but either way, it's going to be good quality and a big print. If I would have shot it at 1.4, it would have been fine as well, but just a little more detail kind of shooting it at 2.2. These frames are absolutely ridiculous. I can't believe that this is a real life thing that happened. And I'm so happy that we were here on this day and that Jeff the officiant was actually the dude that put all this together. And he got Sarah and Josh to somehow agree to this to be their wedding. And I am so happy and thankful that he did and that he involved me. So we're loading up into the helicopter to head back. Jeff is going to give his guided tour on the way back, I'm sure, his tour services as well. You can't really see what I'm doing, but I'm taking photos of them in the back seat. And then I'm going to actually do some outside of the aircraft as well before we take off, because I kind of like this, but I knew that from outside without the seat belts and everything kind of all lit up the same as them, that I could do something pretty cool. And also it's a little bit of a surreal feeling with the tail hanging out over the water there. It looks like you're on a much taller cliff than you are, or that you're even like airborne, rather than just like being parked right here. So super happy with that photo, super happy with this day. And here we go, taking off. This is my GoPro with my hand out the window. I'm happy I didn't drop my GoPro, because then I would have had to have asked him to go back to get my GoPro, which would have been a very challenging and expensive procedure. Maybe, I don't know. I'm not a helicopter pilot. Z6 is working pretty well with the 85, but I want to make the building in the background look a little bit closer. So I'm actually going to go onto my 70-200 and go way in the background so that I can make the building look like it's right there. I was trying to do a little tree vignette, but it turns out it's better without it.
What you're doing right there, and you can just kind of very slowly kind of walk this way towards me. And you can look at each other. All right, this looks good. This is the Drake spot.
I guess we needed a dog to complete it.
That's really good. If you want to look at each other for one or two. Perfect. And I'm going to make you walk one more time, kind of just over to my left here. And you guys can just look at each other and just pretend you're...
Next up, we're into cocktail hour. Cocktail hour is the time usually between the ceremony and the reception that everybody just goes and has a drink or some appetizers or whatever. Or it could be, if the ceremony is off site, that it's kind of the time that everyone's told to arrive at the reception. I am usually pretty photojournalistic during this time, but Tim has a different strategy, and here's Tim to tell you more.
Tim, what is your strategy for the candid session up here on the rooftop?
Candid stuff, I usually look for groups of 2 or more. Otherwise, just taking photos of like individual human beings, and that's kind of sad during cocktail hour, when it's supposed to be a sociable hour. I'll look for a group of like 3 or 5, and I'll do this move, this candid, patented move. Hey guys, what's going on? Do you want to take a quick photo? Great. Now do this. Awesome, thanks.
That is Timothy Musa as candid photographer extraordinaire.
Here's a bunch of photos that Tim took while he was up here on the roof. Very nice, Tim. Thank you. Also, when people ask you for cell phone photos, I'm happy to do that. I also just grab one on my camera like Tim is about to do. right here. And same kind of rules apply, that if they ask for a photo, don't just like snap it really fast and just be like, there you go. Actually spend the time to get a good photo on their phone. They're going to appreciate you. And hopefully maybe in the future, once they actually see your name on something, that they're going to remember that you were the photographer. And maybe that'll become one of your points of contact. These are all my photos from just lurking around with that 85 1.8 Tamron. I am a lot more comfortable doing this rather than actually just approaching groups. I feel like I also kind of need somebody, so it makes this a lot easier when I do have Tim. You could see Tim kind of off to the side of the frame there. When I have somebody to just kind of stand with and take these images rather than just being like clearly the photographer standing in the middle of the room alone. So that is one of the benefits of having two photographers at cocktail hour, even though it might seem a little bit weird. The reception details part of the day usually begins with the exteriors of all of the places that I actually have to go throughout the day. I'm always creating detail shots of anything that I feel is important for the couple or that they would maybe like to have. I usually use the venue exteriors as just kind of an establishing or a transition shot from either the getting ready location or from the ceremony to the reception. And in this case here, I'm shooting everything with an 85mm lens, which I kind of enjoy the look and feel to it rather than getting the same photo with a wide angle lens. When I get into the actual ceremony space, I typically will do a lap of the room with both of my lenses. So usually maybe it's a 35 and an 85. I'll begin with one of them, doesn't really matter which one. I'll photograph everything that I can, and then I'll switch and I'll go around the room one more time. I think that there is a balance here for getting details. So basically, if you want your wedding to be published, you want to go really heavy into photographing details. And because of that, if it's not the dream of my couple to have their wedding published, I almost feel a little bit guilty of that. So I do photograph all of the details, every individual item that they've brought in. But I also do know that there's a limit and that a lot of my couples do want photos of themselves and their family and their friends. And that if the couple was at the venue, they're not here yet. But if they were here, that my time would be better spent probably closer to them actually documenting their day rather than documenting the stuff. So usually I would say, and maybe the reason you don't see the behind the scenes in a lot of my videos on YouTube is because my second photographer typically does it. And I am usually more in a place doing the photojournalism side of things. That all said, it is very important that you capture all the details of the day. So make sure that it does get done. You can see my f-stop in the top corner there. It is at 1.4. I shoot a lot of my details very shallow depth of field, so 1.4, 1.8, maybe 2.0, unless I have a reason to stop down. If basically the reasoning for that would be if I'm very, very close to a subject and it's just a small item that I want to capture, I'll need to bring my f-stop down in order to actually capture that. But when I'm further away, you have a little bit more depth of field with your lenses. I also like shooting wider angle shots like this with an 85mm lens. I feel like it looks a heck of a lot better than getting up super close and kind of distorting those foreground elements. I feel like it looks a lot more wedding and elegant. And details are probably the easiest part of the day, but also if you want to get published, they're a super important part of the day. Look at that spoon. That's my favorite spoon. I love that spoon. For the reception entrance, I usually use the first few people that come in as kind of the tests of the day. If the couple is the only people that are being introduced, it makes all the pressure on that. I know that these images aren't going to win any awards. They're documentary images and you can do the best you can. I would 100% recommend asking the venue staff or the wedding coordinator like exactly what door they're going to come in and where they're going to go. Usually they'll have some visibility on that, but unfortunately it never really 100% works out exactly as they expect. This is one of my favorite times to grab candids of everyone. Hopefully at this point you know kind of who everyone is. Also, fortunately, family members are usually the closest to the dance floor, just as far as the floor plan goes. So it makes it very easy to get candids of all the important people at the wedding. I am on autofocus continuous here and just tracking with them and trying to get as many frames as I possibly can. And at this point, I would say about half my couples actually do their first dances now. They're eventually going to go into their first dance. I'll use that in a couple of minutes here. But I would say half my couples are now doing it at this time rather than after dinner, which I would say 5 years ago, that's pretty much when all of my couples did it. Now people are kind of switching it up a little bit. Entrances can be very challenging. This looks very nice. The light is good, but when everyone comes in a straight line, it's very difficult to get a good image of everyone like you're going to see in a second here. So again, plan the best you can, but know that it's probably not going to go exactly your way and you're not going to end up with the greatest images of the entire wedding day during this part, but do the best you can and just work within the bounds that you're given. I feel like that's kind of all what wedding photography is. So as I mentioned, a lot of my couples are rolling kind of introductions into their first dance. If we're only there for a limited time, say for instance, if we're not actually staying for the entire reception, I would say 100% of my couples do it, especially if they've ordered a highlight film, I kind of push them in that direction in that case. Otherwise, you can kind of make the best you can with the first dance. Sometimes it's a little challenging. Sometimes you can set up off-camera lighting. Sometimes if you're in a space where it's just impossible, or you're in a barn or something, you have to rely on ambient. We'll talk a little bit more about kind of the variables with that in the next section here. But if I can give you one more piece of advice for entrances, it's to use your best judgment. So the ideal is to be where the couple is eventually going to go. But in this case, I wouldn't have been able to get that first initial entrance shot, which is what I wanted. So Tim is over on the other side, and I'm kind of back getting that initial entrance shot, which I felt was going to be a better shot. And then he can kind of come in and get what I missed out on over there. So rolling right into first dances, this is obviously a pretty ideal environment where the ambient light is just more than good enough for me to operate from. I would say in a number of cases, if it is one of those early first dances, usually I try to go ambient and I stand near wherever the light source is. If it's windows, typically I'll just kind of stand there and I can get that really good lighting very easily. And I'll have a few examples coming up in a minute here of what to do whenever it's just not the easiest first dance of all time. My strategy for first dances is to obviously get the clean, just regular shots that they would expect, but then also to do a few laps around the room and to get some images that actually integrate them into the day, such as this, really relying heavily on the shallow depth of field. One, because I think it looks just aesthetically nicer, but two, it'll also add enough blur to people in the background that if they're looking on their phones or they're not looking at the couple, that they're not going to completely distract from the image. But if I'm shooting at something like f8, you're going to have pretty crisp detail and everyone in the background, and it's they're basically pulled into focus of the image. Whether the first dance is something a little more simple like this or something a little bit more complex when they move, usually going in, you've heard something during the day that they've been practicing some sort of choreographed dance. And in that case, I usually try to center myself. If we're doing video coverage, I actually usually do a rolling shot of the entire, or I get my second to do a rolling shot of the entire dance itself, which is kind of a bonus extra that I give to them. If it's more of a simple dance like this where they're just kind of in one spot, I will usually set up, if I have to set up lights, I'll put them in one specific spot and I'll kind of have one angle that looks the best. And then I will rotate around that. So I'll set up the safe shot, I'll get all those frames, and then I'll start rotating around. And I've found that I usually end up liking kind of the half lit shots the best, but I can't exactly, I don't know what that looks like until I actually shoot it. So for instance there, my off-camera light is actually coming through them rather than being kind of a backlight like it is for most of these shots here. But the decision to set that up is not something that's 100% required by any means, that this environment lights itself very nicely. So it's quite easy. I wish they were dancing right where I'm standing, actually. That would have been a very nice kind of spotlight on them. Now moving into a slightly more challenging first dance, I'm actually setting up an off-camera light to bounce off of kind of this wall and the ceiling above. It's kind of coming from the direction of the DJ lights, so I don't find it to be the most distracting thing, that if it's going off, that's totally fine. And it's adding that main light that you see on that image there. You could definitely shoot this ambient with a lens that is something like an f1.4, 1.8, or an f2.0 lens. But my thought process is that I want to add a little bit more to them so that they stand out from everyone else. But as you can see, my flash is kind of spilling a little bit everywhere there. So I'm using depth of field to kind of isolate the couple. Another example is this, that I tried to set up the off-camera flash and I'm actually bouncing off of the roof over there, I guess the garage door that's up. But it turns out that ambient actually is much, much better than anything that I could have done with the flash. So I just leave it at ambient. One important thing to do is talk to the DJ before and figure out what they're going to do. If they can only do white lights for the first dance, I am usually the happiest, that those make my photographic life so much better. If they're going to do something crazy like this, I have to almost start to overpower the lights. So I actually have my flash up way more intense than it usually would be. And I'm actually kind of canceling out a lot of that light because I don't want them to be in the crazy disco lights that he's had set up. So something like that feels a lot better than if it just looked like it was all random colors of light. For the random colors of light, I definitely use when the actual dance floor opens, and I'll usually do more photos of the couple kind of in the center of that. But during the first dance, I like to keep it kind of as simple as possible. Here we have a bounce off of the fireplace that's to my right. It's the only thing that's not wood colored, and that's the style of light that comes off of it, which I very much like. Having an off-camera light allows me to be able to move all around the room and to keep them in that great light. So that's kind of why I choose off-camera flash if I do need to light a first dance like that. Using an on-camera flash is always my first choice if I can. In this situation here, we're in a tent, so the entire ceiling is just a perfect bounce for my flash. So I can kind of be anywhere. And also the quality of light is actually really good here, that even I'll show you some clips right here from video that even without flash, it's good enough. I'd be very happy with those photos. What the flash does is it adds a little bit more dimensionality to your images, as you can see there. And it really is up to you if you decide to include that. For speeches, I will use an off-camera light more often than not, simply because I want to set up good quality light on the podium, which rarely ever exists naturally, but I also don't want to stand super close to the podium if I had my off-camera flash. So now I can be kind of wherever I want to be in the room, and people kind of within the beam of the light are well enough covered. It's not going to be perfect lighting at every single seat, but it is good enough kind of generally to get me close enough to what I want that image to look like. Another example of that is just putting a simple light in front of the head table. You basically get all coverage of the entire head table as well as the podium. And now all of a sudden you can go over here and you can get that shot where everybody's well lit at the head table. And there's kind of this natural vignette of other people kind of in more shadow around them. And as you can see, that's just one light right at the end of their table there. So not even close to the podium. Also, this is a great spot to stand for speeches because the person at the podium is always looking at the couple. So if you're standing behind them, you're usually getting the most eye contact when they're not staring at their page trying to read. I will also leave an off-camera flash in the description what I'm currently using. Currently, at least now, I'm using a Godox V1, which I'm super happy with. This is the older version of the Godox system that I was using. But same principles, it makes light, and light doesn't really change a whole lot. I would have been super happy on this older system, but I find that with the Godox V1 that it can basically do anything that I could ever require from a flash, and it works all the time. As you can see, the light from the flash making very nice, good quality color of light on the couple. And then everyone else is a little bit more yellow and affected by the actual ambient lights. You can also go the other way where you gel your flash. You put a colored gel on your flash that actually matches it with the scene. So everything's super consistent. As I mentioned before, this space with the overhead lights, this is just straight out of camera video. Everybody looks good, even though it's kind of dark through the GoPro or in real life, that through photography, at least you can bump up specific areas of the photo. And while I have a Pocket Wizard on my camera right now, I'm not actually using it. It's not triggering a flash because the lighting in here is more than good enough for me. I have one usually set up just as kind of a backup or as something that I like to just kind of play around with and see, like, is this still looking the best it can be? But ambient wise, it's very good. So now moving into a thing that I only actually have one clip of. This is the only time that I've actually done it, probably in the past couple of years when I've been rolling these behind the scenes videos. Sparkler send-off. So my recommendation would be to shoot a sparkler send-off in this style. It's usually the easiest if you kind of make that little tunnel of light. You can also just have people with sparklers behind them. I would say that in this style of kind of tunnel sparkler send-off, having something like a 50mm lens or an 85 will really work well for you. The hard part is usually getting everybody to actually light their sparklers at the same time. So maybe a tip for that, just get everyone to light sparklers off of each other. If they're trying to light them with a lighter, it's going to be a really hard time. If everyone just lights sparklers off of each other, it basically goes a lot faster. So as they're coming down towards me, I think this is my 24 or maybe my 35, and it's a little bit too wide. I'm getting too much of the foreground, and a situation like this, they have to be moving. If they're stopped, they're literally probably going to get burned by sparks. So you want to keep them moving. And with the 24, it was a good shot, but it wasn't as good as it could have been. So basically the idea is that they do it a few times, they go back and then they come back towards me. That's a shot with the wider lens. And then when I switch to my 85, it looks a heck of a lot better, and it just kind of makes them seem closer, and it makes a more romantic feel, I think, overall. So that kind of wraps up the wedding day, or at least the usual elements that I would see on a wedding day. Now we're going to talk a little bit about posing. So I always start my couple sessions with people walking. I feel like it's the easiest way to get them just normal and comfortable. And then into the basic boring, and just smile and face me full length.
Right. Even like that looks really, really great. And if you guys want to kind of angle in towards each other, and you can put both arms around each other and get really nice and close and cuddly. And if you want to look at each other, you can look at each other. And I'm going to make you hold hands and walk towards me one more time here. And I'll walk into a scooter maybe. That's great. And look at each other and just be unreasonably happy with each other. That was a good unreasonably happy. Yeah.
I always keep my shoots moving, especially engagement sessions, because it's a little more awkward than an actual wedding day. We're always moving and we're always finding new locations, and we're never really staying anywhere past like maybe a minute or two. And I found that that really helps my couples relax and just be closer to their normal selves rather than just the photo shoot version of themselves.
That's great. Perfect. And you know what? Even if you want to put an arm around each other while you kind of walk towards me. That looks good. And you can kind of look up at each other and just pretend you're going for a nice little walk here.
And this isn't a specific tip to posing, I guess, but shooting with an 85mm lens does help me create better images. It helps me get a little bit closer to my couples without physically being that close and making things a little bit weird. It also creates an amazing depth of field separation when shot wide open, as you've been seeing. As you can also see, I have a number of poses that are kind of my go-to poses, but the lighting and the situation kind of changes them, or the look and feeling completely. If you are nervous about that, or you just want a refresher, or you want to have something on your phone, you can either make a Pinterest gallery of a bunch of images and poses that you like, or you can get an app like Unscripted that'll actually have a bunch of those poses for you.
So happy with that. And I'm going to make you guys kind of hold hands, and you can slowly walk because I feel like this ground's a little sketchy. That's good. And if you want to kind of hug his arm like you were doing there, kind of both arms around his arm. Yeah, something like that's nice. And you guys can look at each other and just pretend you're amazing.
This is kind of pre-golden hour. It wasn't really supposed to look like this, but for some reason today, the way everything kind of came together, it all worked out. I really love this natural frame of green space here, and the way that even the pathway kind of leads up to it. Everything leads into this image. The sun is at their back, and that's where I like it at this time of the day. So it gives that nice warm wraparound light. And the light overall kind of feels a little bit like California today, where there's a cloud just kind of softly diffusing all the light coming from the sun, and I'm into it.
Amazing. These look so good. And I'm going to make you take a quick little walk that way and turn around and come back towards me one more time. Perfect. And you guys turn around and come back this way. And same deal as before, just nice and slow, and you guys can look at each other and perfect.
So as you can obviously see, I shoot a lot of frames, and that is because when people are walking, that I want that perfect shot with their legs or arms or hands or the lighting to flare at the exact right moment. So I don't mind overshooting it to make sure that I get kind of that exact image that I want. And maybe one complication that you'll find on an actual wedding day is if there's a dress that's a little bit too large, or you don't want to risk it getting dirty before the ceremony. I reserve a lot of the movement-based shots until after the ceremony, or maybe for the golden hour session, but rather than doing them before the ceremony.
And if you guys want to just look at each other again and just pretend you're having a great time, it looks incredible. This is the most green space photo I've taken.
Super happy how all this came together, and it's not something you could really plan. Like, you can't go and scout this location and be like, we're going to do this shot. You just kind of have to let it come together on the day and be prepared and know when to double down on something when it's working.
And I'm going to have you guys one more time just kind of walking just slowly towards me over here. And I might make you do this a few times because this is like the perfect...
So that is a little bit about my strategy. In the member site, there is a full Introvert's Guide to Wedding Photography Posing that goes into a lot more detail of what we're doing out here. My main things that if I can tell you is that don't overthink it, to have a few poses in mind and a few go-tos. But usually the way that it comes together, at least for me, is that I will have a few things in mind and they will do them a little bit differently, and I'll see that they do something good and I'll review that in the back of my camera, and it will be a better image than I had in mind, and we'll kind of keep pivoting from there. I think it's important in your job as a photographer to get people as normal and comfortable as fast as possible. And I found for engagement sessions specifically that movement really does help that process and gets people feeling a lot more normal, a lot more quick. Is that the correct grammar? I don't know. Close. You get what I'm trying to say.
Booking your first weddings, I'll speak through my experiences and what I kind of did. There's a whole lot of content about this specific thing on the members website. So if you're interested in that, sign up for a month and see how it goes. There's a 100% money back guarantee. If you're not 100% happy, let me know and I'll send your money back. But there are 20 plus courses on there. Also in the kind of newer, or at least current economy of things, weddings are kind of slowly getting back in some countries. So we're seeing a lot more elopements and a lot smaller of weddings overall. So there are two courses. There's an elopements course as well as a micro weddings course up there as well, if you're interested in that. I would say that elopements are definitely here to stay. And I would also say that elopements generally unlock cooler opportunities as far as where you get to go with a smaller group of people. But there are so many courses on specifically booking kind of more standard style weddings on there as well. So to speak to my first experiences getting into the industry, I tried to reach out to every single photographer that I could to be like, hey, I'd love to second shoot with you. And I didn't get a whole lot of responses. And until I was actually shooting weddings on my own, I didn't start to really see referrals from other photographers. I think it's very important to befriend other photographers and to be kind of in the same circles, because kind of what happens, this will work in the commercial side of your business as well, that jobs will come in and they will be priced so far below what that photographer is currently charging. And they'll be like, yeah, I can't do that, but I can send you to this guy that's just starting out. Maybe he'll be able to help you out. I got a lot of my first commercial jobs that way, and I got a lot of my first weddings that way as well. My very first weddings though, I actually had to go out and get on my own. So the first one I got off Craigslist of all places. I listed like, hey, at the time I was a concert photographer. I had done a few styled shoots and a few engagement shoots around town here. I was like, here's my portfolio, love to come out absolutely free. Shooting for my portfolio will give you, I think it was like 100 final images, as well as I'll be there for 2 to 3 hours. Please get in touch. And I figured I'd be like, oh, like I'm gonna have like 25 people that are all gonna be stoked to have me. And it turns out that only 2 and only 1 ended up working out, and it didn't really work out that well. So that was a stressful wedding and not a whole lot of fun. And while it worked, I don't know if I would go that route again, but it was just, I just wanted to get out there and shoot weddings. The more fun version of, I guess, what happened next was that I actually booked a wedding for a friend of a friend that they just didn't have the budget for a photographer. So I'm like, yeah, I'll absolutely come out and I'll do those photos. So my 2 first weddings were absolutely free, that they were just all for portfolio. I was also reaching out to them, essentially. I wasn't the one that was like getting an email like, hey, Taylor, we'd love to have you shoot our wedding. That just wasn't realistic at that time. I was also very young, which made it another level of difficulty as well, just social gaps between myself and my couples that were 25 and I'm like 17, 18. So those are my experiences. I don't know, like I'm happy that they worked out and they were kind of all I had at the time. Looking back, what I could have done a lot better is that I was on the right track whenever I set up those first shoots, those first preview shoots in order for me to sell my services. I wish I would have kept more with that. I see the value of it now. I didn't really see the value of it at the time. I would spend a lot of my time just convincing every single couple that you possibly can to go out and do a shoot with you and to really build your portfolio. One, you'll become a much better photographer when you actually have to interact with people and figure out kind of what looks good and what lenses you like and which lighting scenarios really came together well. You learn a lot, but then you also just get really comfortable working with people, and you build your portfolio out at the same time. So I would say go out as many shoots as you can possibly set up, do that. I would say to also bridge that into doing wedding styled shoots as well. That one of my most successful times that I laid off it as soon as I did it was that I convinced a couple that was one of my friends. They got married very young, and I was like, hey, I know you didn't really love your wedding photos that you got from your photographer. Can we go out and can we do a session around town? And we went out for a walk and we did a bunch of photos, and those photos were in my portfolio for probably about 7 or 8 years before I was kind of like, I don't know if the canted angle is in, maybe that has to go now. But that was definitely a huge success. And looking back, that was probably the point that pivoted my career for people to actually start contacting me and to start getting in touch. And people would still ghost me and do weird stuff because I was just this brand new photographer. But it was very much my first kind of entrance into really looking like a wedding photographer online. I think it is more important, and especially now than ever, to have as much content as you can possibly get on your own, to start marketing yourself and marketing your own business with. That if you sit around and you wait for that to organically come to you, it's going to take a very, very long time. But if you get out there and you start connecting with people, or say you've booked a wedding and you've done a wedding and you know a makeup artist or a hairstylist or a florist, or maybe you're close with a venue, or maybe your friend owns a restaurant and they want some restaurant style wedding photos for them to use in their own marketing efforts, kind of whatever opportunities you have, go like explore them and figure out how you can put together wedding style shoots from there. That if you say to a makeup artist like, hey, I'd love to do a style shoot with you, happy to cover your hard costs of makeup and I just want some images for my portfolio, all of a sudden maybe they're gonna know somebody and they're gonna know a location, or maybe they're gonna know a couple, or they're gonna know a wedding dress shop, and things come together a lot faster than you kind of expect. So make sure that you're in control of your own portfolio at all times, rather than just sitting back and waiting for it to come to you, because it'll take a long time if you go that route. So to book your first weddings, definitely start building your own portfolio today, and you will organically attract them along the way, and you'll find these opportunities and your name will get passed along in weddings, and engagement shoots will come up over time, as well as you can use all of the content that you're creating for paid Facebook ads, paid Instagram ads, or TikTok ads, whatever you want to do. If you're creating all of this content and putting this in front of the right people, you will book your first weddings, no problem. Welcome to the editing section of this video. I'm going to walk you through my editing process. It's a bit of a three-tiered process. We do Photo Mechanic first, followed by Lightroom, followed by Photoshop. I guess Photo Mechanic, maybe we'll talk in a minute about it, but it's not 100% necessary for you to purchase if you don't yet have it. Maybe taking a step back even before then, the night of the wedding, so I spoke in the camera setup that I shoot RAW plus JPEG whenever possible. So I'm actually shooting JPEGs, and when I get home, I back those up to either Dropbox or SmugMug or wherever you host your JPEGs, and I put everything up there so that it's very quick, easy backup, and within a couple of hours, they're usually online and have an offsite backup. My other backups are my local backups. I have this drive here that is just simply a backup drive. So all it does is store backed up images, and I never actually touch it. That it's, if I need to go back and reference it, I can, but I never edit, I never do anything on this drive. And what I do is I actually drag the entire, I don't have a memory card in here, but I drag the entire folder, as you can see, from the memory card over to this backup folder. And then when it loads over, I'll have a quick scroll down to make sure nothing's grayed out. If Finder crashes out, or on kind of Mac, if Finder crashes, it might not tell you, it'll reboot, but it might not continue actually loading things in. There are programs that you can use to assist yourself in the ingest process, but I've found that I like just having full control over this specific thing. I will either verify by right-clicking and get info, or I will go down here. If there's 2,692 items in this folder, that if I see that on the card, I'm pretty happy. Then I go back to the card and I copy everything over to my working drive. So I'll make just a specific folder just for them, and I'll copy everything over. If it's just myself there and it's like a 2-camera shoot, I'll put everything in one folder. If we're doing photo and video coverage, I'll start splitting it out by cameras. After that, usually the next day, I'll go into Photo Mechanic down here. Lightroom is pretty quick at making selections, but I find that Photo Mechanic is just so much faster. I also personally like having a little bit of a separation in my mind that, okay, I sit down and this is my selecting time. And then when I finish that, I can feel some sort of a reward, and then I move over to Lightroom from there. So it's internally, at least, like, it keeps me a little bit happier. But basically, and a super fast way to make your selects rather than going through Lightroom that is traditionally a little bit slower overall, and might slow you down, that it might just not be able to keep up. Sam Hurd, if you're not familiar with Sam, he shot our wedding actually. He has a lot of tips for how to make your Lightroom super fast, and it does make it really great, but I still like the reward of kind of having that, like, I've completed this task, now on to the Lightroom section. And with that, yeah, on to the Lightroom section. The way that I use Photo Mechanic, basically everything that you take on the entire day, you load the folder in, again, working from the working drive, and then you just go through and you just make your selects. Your cameras will probably just load in by file name first. So if you want to switch things to chronological order, you can. Here's my, I think I was probably walking while I was doing that. But basically you just cycle through, and whenever you find an image that you like, you stop on it and hit either 1, 2, all the way to 9 or 0, and it'll flag it with a different color. Usually I'll make the red just kind of my general selection, that, like, that image, yes, I will edit that. And then I'll also do a second flag, either a 2 or a 3, for something that maybe I'm gonna put on Instagram, or that in the past that I would have blogged. From there, I select all the images that I want, and then I just simply drag them like this over into Lightroom. File, you can't see, come down here, import photos and video, and then everything just loads in. This is a bit of an eclectic mix of different photos that I've taken in different lighting conditions. I figured it was important to show you just kind of a general overall of kind of what a wedding day looks like for me. Always trying to shoot in the best lighting conditions I can, but sometimes you just don't have complete control of it. When you load into library mode, so there's one secret hidden feature. I guess it's not secret hidden, but I didn't know about it for a very long time. It does these global corrections over here. which right now doesn't really matter. Like I'm not going to be adjusting all of these by one stop of exposure or a little bit of warmth and temperature. But if you're editing at nighttime and you load the gallery up the next day and everything is just a little bit too cool or a little bit too warm or a little bit too overexposed, you can actually come in here and you can globally adjust it. In Develop, if you're syncing the settings, you're making all the settings exactly the same. What you're doing here is you're actually moving things based like on, if it's set to, you've adjusted to exposure +2, and you hit this, it comes down 1/3 of a stop rather than setting it to 1/3 of a stop. So hidden thing that I didn't know about for a long time that really changed my life. I use it for white balance a lot. That I outsource a lot of my post-production, so when I get a gallery back, sometimes it's just a little bit too cool or it's a little bit too warm and I want to make that quick adjustment, and this allows me to do that. So double clicking brings you into the full view of it. This is also the easiest place if you need to rotate images. Hopefully your camera does this automatically, but if it doesn't, then you can easily spin your images around in here. So moving over to Develop, I really only ever use Develop mode. I don't use anything else within this, strangely enough. We have all of my presets here. So if you're a member, you have access to all of these presets. And even though I wish I wouldn't have named them with like 2018, because even though it is a 2018 preset, I'm still super happy with it, and I would still be like more than happy to deliver an image on that. And sometimes it just fits the gallery a lot better. I would say if you are a member or if you've purchased this preset pack, go through and figure out maybe the 5 or 6 that you like the absolute best and put them, just drag them into a different folder and make that kind of the ones that you choose from. If you're using every single one of these presets in every wedding or every portrait shoot, your work is really going to be kind of all over the place. So the more you can kind of simplify it into just a few, the better and happier I think that you're going to be with your work long term. That everything always looks awesome in the moment, but 5 years from now, if you stick to something that's a little bit more cohesive, I think that you're going to be a little bit happier overall. So the Spring 2021 presets are my newest, and I would say that they work the best for mirrorless cameras. Up until that point, I was on digital SLR, so even the 2020 presets, I'm still super happy with the main 2020, but it's definitely something that works slightly better on my digital SLR tones. That said, even though this is from a Nikon Z6, I'm actually going to edit from the main today. So if you're not familiar with Lightroom, all of your simple basic controls are here. For wedding photography, typically I'm only ever touching kind of these right here. So I'm not ever really going too much into texture, clarity, dehaze, vibrance, saturation. That these are kind of what I will do. We'll talk a little bit more about the advanced things that you can do within Lightroom, and then the more advanced things that you can do in Photoshop that Lightroom can't do or doesn't do as efficiently. But what I will usually do at this point is I'll decide like, okay, this looks good on the opening image. Should I sync this preset across every single other image? And usually what I'll do is I'll hit Command A or Control A, and I'll select everything down here, and then I'll hit Command Shift S or Control Shift S, and I'll actually pop this up and I will just sync everything. So I won't sync white balance, but all of the other settings I will sync across everything. For today's demonstration, I am not going to be doing this, but usually this is what I would do, and I would edit from this kind of that profile. Makes my life, I guess, just easier that I don't have to click a button every single time I load into something. So an image like this, what I'm looking at basically is that it is in good light, but it's kind of backlit right now. And what I want to do is I want to bring a little bit more light onto their faces and save the background just a little bit. So something like that I would be pretty happy with. I'm always doing my best to expose 4 skin tones and to make people look as good as they possibly can. So I might even do something kind of even crazier like this, and maybe even bring the shadow or the highlights down a little bit more. You can also, if you are looking, so basically this is maybe a very difficult image to begin on, but if you're looking at bringing back kind of what's going on back here, you have a few options. You can either paint it in manually, so you can come over here to the adjustment brush and you can go and set it to -0.5 exposure, and you can paint everything and you can try to mask out and around here. But what I usually do in kind of volume-based batch settings is I'll come over here to the graduated filter and I will set something like maybe a very, very small exposure, and then something maybe a little bit more extreme for the highlights, and I will come down here like this. So basically what this is doing, you can kind of see it now, so that it has full effect up here. When it hits this line, it starts to fade out, and by this line up here, it is completely gone. So to bring back a little bit of that background, something like that feels a little bit better.
So it doesn't look overall like it's been, I guess, these flowers. So everything is a balance. And again, this is probably a hard photo to start on. Chronologically, it came first though. All right, so something like that, I feel like balances correctly. I'm happy with them specifically, which is always the most important, followed by the rest of the scene I am very happy with as well. So moving over here, if it is the same image, we'll talk about this a little bit more throughout the gallery, but if it's a similar image and you just want to copy all the settings, you can just hit this previous button here. It's right there, and you will just copy everything over. So usually it's a good starting point. What it did, basically, that it was a completely different lighting scenario and it was a very different exposure. So I'm going to adjust that back and I'm going to adjust the crop. So this is your crop tool up here, and I'm just going to reset that since I was a little more straight. And something like this looks pretty good. And I'm going to do the same thing I did last time, where I kind of pull in a little bit of highlights from the side here, but try not to overdo it and leave it at something like that. As I'm sure you probably saw, this lady up here, I don't specifically want her in the photo. So the easiest way for just quick spot removal is actually coming here to this button here. And this works most of the time. And just by painting them out like this. I also usually use a tablet, but I'm using a mouse today, so I might be a little bit slower. But usually by doing something like that, you get pretty close. In this case, it didn't really do it. Like wide shot, you can definitely see that. Looking at it for the first time, a couple probably won't notice it, but for me, it's definitely something that I notice. So what I'll do is I'll try one more time. I'll move this just up a little bit. And because that doesn't quite work for me, I'm actually going to load this image into Lightroom, and I'll be doing a specific Lightroom adjustment in that. Basically, in Lightroom, you can do a content-aware fill, where you just quickly grab exactly what you want and you hit Shift-Delete, and then it'll pop up a box and you just hit Enter, and it will, I would say 99% of the time, give you exactly what you want and make that object disappear. You can also move objects in it too, so you can do a content-aware move if you want to move her and add her 10 more times across the screen. So I'm happy with that image there. Nothing else that I would be too worried about adjusting. Moving over into this image here. So one of the, I guess, the benefits of this summer preset here is that if you are in a backlit environment, that this summer preset will typically add even more warmth to the image. In this case, because I am a little bit underexposed, it's doing some pretty crazy things to skin. So I'm actually going to go back to my main preset and we'll edit from there. I'll actually be increasing the warmth as well. I find that when I am in an image that is naturally very warm, that my camera never really reaches the level of warmth that I want within the actual white balance settings. So I think something like that I'm a little bit happier with overall. Cool, happy with that. Moving into another sunset image, again, same deal, that I'm going to maybe increase the white balance a little bit here, and I think that will be all right. And I'm gonna try the summer again. Looks like from the preview that it's going to be a little bit too harsh and a little too, oh, that looked all right. So the preview lied to me, and it's actually a very, very nice shot overall. So your shadows definitely having a huge effect here, from absolute silhouettes to, I guess this is the power of raw. I don't want it to be a completely properly exposed image. I'm happy with it somewhere around there. And then you can even come in here to the graduated filter again and maybe pull down the sun a little bit, or you can even kind of warm it up. That might be too much. I feel like it's important to make sure your edits kind of hide. The more natural you can leave it, usually the better. And I think that's something like that's I'm pretty happy with. All right, now moving over to Paris. Even straight at a camera, I'm super happy with this image, with the exception I'm always on this like weird 1 degree slant. So making the image straight, and maybe come over here to main, and something like that I'm pretty happy with already. So the reason I brought highlights down is because it's a very overcast day, and any little detail I can get out of the sky, I'm happy to have. Highlights in this image, they don't really have a huge effect on the skin tones, as you can see. They do have a little bit of an effect, but I think that by doing it just to like bring a little bit of the sky back and to make it a little bit more gray rather than just white, I am happy with. You can even do something like that, I guess, to make it even a little more. I like the way that this natural vignette is creeping in. You can also use a graduated filter to add like vignettes if you're interested in that. So basically you can kind of go maybe something like this, and you can do something like that. And you can actually add kind of little vignettes to help frame your subjects. So if you were to add a vignette in Lightroom, it would be very just circle. It would be a circle that it just kind of tries to frame. If you're adding vignettes with the graduated filter, things tend to hide a little bit better and it feels a little more like a framed image rather than just like a weird edited vignette. So this looks pretty nice. Pretty happy with that. All the presets are designed for skin tone, so they basically are to do the best they possibly can within weird lighting conditions to fix skin tones and to make it a little bit easier on your editing. I will also find that certain camera systems are a little bit easier when it comes to editing as well, that when I am shooting with something like my Nikon, my Z6II or my D850 that I used for a bunch of years prior to this, that those files are super easy to edit. That I find that within a couple of seconds I can, or even within one click a lot of the time, that I'm already pretty close to where I want to be. But I have found a few camera systems that are a little more challenging. So make sure that if you do find yourself in one of those situations that maybe you modify this preset based on kind of what your camera naturally does. If it's a little bit too magenta all the time or a little bit too green, to build that into your preset so you're able to just quickly edit and with some level of efficiency. So maybe I'll mention on the last one, I didn't really do a whole lot. Hit click main, brought the highlights down and just made it kind of balance overall. No faces in this one, so it's a little bit easier overall. So this image here, something like that I'm pretty happy with. It's almost getting a little too magenta for me. So I'm going to warm it up just a little bit to kind of hide that. And I am very happy with that overall. If you want to add a little bit of face light, you can actually just kind of come in here. If you want to lighten anything in images, I will always recommend that you bring the contrast down and the shadows up rather than just cranking the exposure. And doing something like this adds just a little bit more. And as you can see, it kind of hides perfectly in there. This is, well, it's a very lovely image. I found that this was maybe the most difficult session that I've ever had to edit in my entire life. I don't know what the deal is, but it was very challenging and I couldn't get, like, the straight out of camera JPEGs were actually what I was happiest with. That I ended up just like, I think everything that I posted online is actually straight out of camera JPEGs or straight out of camera with a little bit of contrast added, because of the fact that these magentas were just really challenging to deal with. That, like, I want it because I want the magenta kind of all in the sky like it naturally was, but whenever I make their skin tones correct, all of a sudden I lose that magenta from the rest of the scene. I could come in with a graduated filter and kind of add that back if I wanted, but overall I found that the JPEGs that came off the Nikon, that this was a Z6, were actually like what I wanted the final images to be, which is kind of funny. So this image here, like, this is, even the raw file I'm super happy with. When I actually come over here into my presets, I'm actually not quite as happy with it overall. So that means I'm gonna have to find a different preset, maybe my V2. My computer is going extra slow because I am both processing in Lightroom, which is very challenging, and then also doing a screen record. Something like that I'm a little bit happier with overall, but it is by no means as good as it was straight out of camera. So maybe take that as a note that if you are shooting JPEGs, specifically if you're a Fuji shooter, and those JPEGs look incredible to you, there's no reason to go in and mess around with them. That if they're just what you want those images to be, by all means, just like that can be the final edit, and obviously shoot the raw files too to make sure that you kind of have that in case you need them. But other than that, like, I don't know. I've definitely, for family sessions, I'm gonna say most of the time I'm editing from my JPEG files, because I know that family sessions, completely controlled environments, controlled lighting, that I'm getting what I want. And to just package those up and send those out makes my life a lot easier on the post-production side of things. So I like this, but I kind of even liked it a little bit underexposed like that. I should have been a little bit more centered in my camera and my physical location over there. I think I got a few that were perfectly centered, but I liked this one kind of the best once I got into it. There's a little man over here if you want him to disappear. That's a little bit of an easier edit than the other one. Maybe these things here too can go away. So most of the time you're gonna be able to hide what you need to hide with that tool, but sometimes you gotta move into Photoshop as well. I think even though we just watched that happen, that looks a little too extreme, and that you wanna go in, you wanna modify, I can just get rid of that as well. That you wanna modify that, but I don't think that anybody's gonna kind of be looking over there. Images like this, I definitely want even more warmth in the image than there was originally there. Like, I'm gonna push into like over 10,000, 11,000 Kelvin. And then I'm going to come into probably this preset here. I can actually dial it back a little bit. That made it very, very strangely magenta. So I'm gonna knock down the magenta to green a little bit and then bring this up and correct for my 1% angle, and that's something I'm pretty happy with. All right, last image from this shoot, 2020 main. If you are into architecture photography, I'm sure you're aware that this image that will eventually load is maybe not ideal. You can see as the flowers go up here that it very much isn't square, that it looks like it's descending on an extreme angle, which it isn't. You can actually go into transform if you want to fix that. You can try auto, sometimes it works. Today it worked. Got close enough, didn't 100% work. It also clips, because of basically what it has to do, it kind of crops their feet. So I would maybe find a different image and run that on it, because I do like how that looks a lot better than something like that. Although Richard and Riley, they're taller in the non-transform version, so they might be a little bit happier with that image. So maybe something to consider and something to balance, that if your couple looks as great as they possibly can, maybe don't worry too much about the background. At this point, I'm actually going to do this 2020 main, as I mentioned, and I'm going to sync this across everything. So I'm going to come to the end of the image set and Shift Command S, all except for white balance, and synchronize. So that'll take a second, but it'll give me a starting point that will kind of speed things up a little bit. Overall, I would say that efficiency is kind of your best friend when it comes to processing weddings. And with that preset loaded up, I'm kind of free to just do simple corrections like this. We'll get rid of this lovely fire alarm. You could probably get rid of it in, try again. Will Lightroom go 0 for 3? It's hard with specific lines because you have to make sure the lines exactly line up. Okay, so there. I missed a piece of it with the brush. You can easily fix that, but that looks pretty good. So 1 for 3 for Lightroom today. Moving over here, same deal. I'll get rid of that. Fire alarm. Although in this photo, it doesn't really look like it's anything. So you know what? Looked better just being in the frame. We'll get rid of that in Photoshop. Something like this is usually how I would more likely be editing images, where I'm just kind of adjusting, for the most part, the exposure. And when you can get kind of in a flow like that, a lot of this does actually come with shooting everything as correct as you can in camera. So if you're shooting with the correct white balance and the correct exposure that you want to be editing to, it makes things a lot easier. Like an image like that, I'm just kind of happy with it as it is. I think as photographers, we definitely have a tendency to maybe over-process and to make things as good as they possibly can be. But for the most part, the more real to the scene that you can leave it, I think at least my couples, the happier they kind of are with that. Obviously, if you're way underexposed or way overexposed, it's a little bit weird, but as long as you're making it feel like reality, I think that my couples will be pretty happy with that, and hopefully yours will be as well. So again, something like that with the preset already added, I'm pretty happy to just kind of leave that as it is. Again, same deal, just move into next. This, I'm a little slanty, I'm a little off center, and it's not quite warm or bright enough. So I'm going to have to go in here and do a quick little adjust. The other thing maybe is that you have to be aware of everybody else that's in the frame. So something like that might end up being a bit of a better scene when it comes to kind of the final album. Dave and Alma coming down the aisle. And I'll have to pick a better one. Sorry for I was just randomly selecting from the thumbnails. David has his eyes closed in this one. Nonetheless, we will edit the image. And something like that I'm pretty happy with. When they come into situations like this, I do usually add a little bit of warmth and a little bit of exposure. What I find that if I do underexpose something is that you either have to add a little bit of vibrance or saturation back, or you actually have to add warmth. I find that adding warmth usually solves the problem most of the time. And that also gives me something that I can just click the previous button down here with and jump to, like, that. I'm just happy with that there. Flower blew out a little bit, but I don't mind that the background is a little bit blown out. It's kind of the best that you can do on the day without bringing in huge lights to actually offset the entire sun, which is a little too much, I think.
Again, white balance up just a little bit. You can also get a product called a loop deck, or you can get some sort of other MIDI controlling device that can actually make all of these into tactile adjustments. I've found that with just a simple tablet and a keyboard that I'm usually pretty happy overall. I've used a loop deck for a couple of years, but I find that it's just, it's as easy with my tablet and my keyboard. All right. So again, simple adjustments. Most of them I'm just bumping up the exposure here a little bit, as well as a little bit of white balance too. Making it a little bit warmer, something like that. And then this one I'm gonna correct for the angle that I always shoot at. One day my camera will just, that's the only thing that I need, is that if I can do, like, GoPro has their linear stabilization, and every shot that you take with a GoPro will be exactly linear if you set that to on. So I'm waiting one day for my camera to get there. Or maybe I could just learn to not shoot on an angle all the time, but I don't know. 15 years in and still shoot on an angle. So if you shoot on an angle too, know that you're not alone. It's just, it's life. All right, again, just white balances and exposures. This is a bit of a, I guess, a dynamic scene in regards to if I'm aiming towards the back of the church, it's very, very warm light, or not church, outdoor ceremony space. It's very, very warm light, but as it gets closer to the front, it gets a little bit cooler. So that's why when everyone was coming down the aisle that it looked beautiful, and then it quickly kind of moved to something that wasn't exactly ideal. So this is a situation where I would like to keep the background as best as I possibly can. So by just kind of cranking down these highlights and then moving up these shadows, you can kind of balance the best that you can. But no, I would say for the most part that if you are happy with the way that the couple looks in the photos, that is what they're going to care about the most. And if the background goes a little bit, that's not going to be something that they're ever going to be too concerned about. A little bit of warmth here. I feel like the moral of this wedding is that I just shot it not quite as warm as I should have. Here we go. Moving to cocktails, I've now adjusted my white balance to actually be what it was in real life. Shooting candids like this, I typically will just find the people that are in good light, and I will just kind of focus on them and get the shots that I need. Rather than trying to get photos of people that are in bad light, I'll just sit near the good light and wait for those people that are in the bad light to hopefully come to the good light at some point. So for white balances in challenging settings, you can actually use the dropper. So the dropper kind of hides right here, and you can just click on something that's white. Fortunately, she's wearing or holding a white piece of paper. You'll also notice that fortunately for us as wedding photographers, that there's usually somebody wearing a white dress or a white shirt, and it's very easy to white balance off of them. I will say that, at least for my preference, that Lightroom tends to white balance a little bit cooler. So I made it just a little bit warmer than that, and again, corrected for a little bit of my slant. So I'm gonna try just hitting previous and see how that goes. As you can see, maybe not the most ideal. We can try hitting, if you're just kind of at a loss for it, you can always try hitting auto. And I would say that auto is pretty accurate most of the time. And something like that I'm quite happy with. At the podium, I think the lighting is actually kind of what I want it to be. And I'm quite happy with that. So without the preset, that's kind of what it looked like there. With the preset, as you can see, in kind of a maybe non-ideal lighting scenario, the preset actually really kind of helps you out and makes your life a little bit easier. For an image like this, I would say for kind of your favorites to do that gradient little hack for making a vignette that I talked about, so that you're actually making it feel a little bit more romantic. It almost looks a little bit too bright. I guess I also have tint on here too, so I guess it's a very, their lighting color is purple, so it kind of matches. It was a fortunate mistake there. So I would be just adding a little bit of vignette when the scene is a little bit too bright, if they're doing their first dance during daytime, or if your flash is just kind of everywhere, or if the ambient in the room was actually extremely bright. So something like that looks good. I'm going to reset this and add a few more of these just to make the rest of the room a little bit darker. And you can kind of add as many as you want, really. So something like that I'm a little bit happier with. That's the straight out of camera image that is loading there. So that's all right. I think that looks a heck of a lot better just with a few quick seconds in Photoshop. So my camera struggles definitely with this specific, I guess, lighting. So when you're in a very warm environment and in a very warm setting, it is very important that you lock your settings to exactly what you want them to be, because if you're shooting automatic, you will get colors that they're not exactly what you want, and they're not really true to life. Again, a few quick clicks there. When you're shooting a writing camera, it's pretty easy to do. The dress is a little blown out. No, we're good. You want to make sure that there is detail in the dress, kind of at all pieces of the dress, and also a shirt as well. That I'll kind of use those as my markers. So if I'm making the dress a little bit too white and it's becoming a pure white, which means that it's clipping on your histogram up here, and you see that there's a little line all the way up here. Or it can kind of go the other way too, that if I am way too dark into the shadows, a lot of my presets actually don't have a pure black in them. They have kind of a mid, I guess, a darker gray. But if you see that like all of a sudden there's this huge group of color kind of down here towards almost black, you know, to kind of balance out that image. Reading a histogram is a bit, overall, I guess, not necessarily misleading, but you do have to learn how to read it, simply because it can tell you like some pretty crazy things. But if you're looking at the image and it is a silhouette image with a single rim light or something, all of a sudden, like, that's kind of what you want it to be actually, and you don't have to edit for the histogram correctness when the histogram is telling you kind of what is going on in the image that you shot. So a little too contrasty, but by just bringing up the exposure, I'm thinking that it will remove a little bit about that. Perfect. I'm pretty happy with that. I'm gonna add a little more, little pump to the shadows here. This is kind of a natural vignette, I would say, that it just kind of, the scene just naturally frames itself. But I will say that to balance the front chairs up here with them, or with the trees, we'll make it a little bit nicer. So an edit like that looks pretty nice. You can also bring the shadows way up and get a little bit more color in the trees if you want. There's no real right or wrong way to make your edits, which is both the positive and negative, because you can never be finished when you don't know that somebody's not like, this is exactly what it needs to be. There's never that point to edit to. You just kind of have to do the best you can. So this is an example of kind of more challenging side lighting. I just kind of lit this a little bit wrong. I should have had them rotated, but I kind of did like this background. You can do kind of the best you can in a scene like this. My main concern would be make sure that there's no pure white on the side of his face here. If that starts to clip to white, at that point, you have to kind of reevaluate how you've done the edit. If you ever are in a situation like that, you can definitely do some things where there's a few presets in here that do not have anywhere close to a pure white. It's more of a gray, and I'll find that if like I need to kind of save something, if it just doesn't balance, that if I use a preset like that, I'm actually able to kind of save the image in a lot of cases. So I'm going to use the previous button down here to kind of basically the positive of the preset button is that it also saves you time, but it also makes things a little bit more cohesive from image to image. So if you're editing a full set or you're editing all the family photos, that everything will look pretty much the same. And waiting for Lightroom, or maybe I've already done it and I'm waiting for myself. So that's all right. I like the other images better. This might not be one that I would 100% deliver, just because of the non-balances of a little bit too much brightness up here on Michelle's shoulder, and not quite enough in their faces naturally as it comes together. You can obviously go in and edit those, but if I just have a different one with them kind of in the same pose from a different angle, it's a little bit easier for me to deliver that. So one click, I would consider that to be done, with the exception again of my slant. Just waiting. There we go. Happy with that. Next image, maybe a little too dark, so I'm gonna add a little bit of exposure. And I'm kind of happy to let the windows go like that and just kind of retain that. The full image, there it is. The full image hadn't loaded, so it looked a little blurry. That's another thing that kind of trips me out sometimes when I'm trying to make my selects in Lightroom, is that the full image sometimes doesn't actually load, and I'm looking at an image and I'm like, oh, that one's soft, and then it turns out it just hasn't actually loaded yet. So this would be an example that should be very, very easy for Lightroom to get rid of this. And this. So there you go. Pretty easy to just kind of get rid of small details that you just want to disappear like that. I guess I didn't get all of the... Just do it again. I also use a brackets key. So brackets, this side of bracket makes your brush smaller. As you can see there, it's shrinking. And then the other one makes it a little bit wider. So a lot of the time you can kind of just put whatever you want to select in a single click, and it will usually make it disappear as well. Looks a little bit better. If you wanted to add, so overall I think the scene is well exposed, but I think what's lacking is that there's just no light really kind of on this section of the flowers. So I'm gonna paint this in. The settings are currently wrong, but I'll probably do the old contrast down, shadows up, just to bring out a little bit more of that, and your florist will be a lot happier with you than if you just kind of crushed all the colors together down there. And our non-linear edit of the day, I guess this camera was set a little bit different. Situations like this where it's overcast and it's harsh overcast, for first looks, I'm always setting it up so when whoever it is that's going to be turning, if there is somebody that's turning, when they turn, they're actually in the best light. So a lot of the time they're set up kind of against that best light. So I do the best I can to just kind of add a little bit more light and to lighten up kind of the harsh shadows under his eyes there. So that when they actually do turn and do the first look, that it's in the most ideal lighting that it can be. That image didn't even quite load and we're already done with it. That should be hopefully your efficiency after a couple of weddings, that you can be making the edits before the full image actually loads and it looks sharp to you. Say for instance right there, that I'm pretty much happy with it and the image hasn't loaded. We'll wait for it patiently. There we go. That looks nice. All right, and into the last image here. Definitely too bright. Something like that, a little bit better. And then add that so that all the colors don't just kind of all crush together. All right, that is the Lightroom section of the day. For my actual Lightroom export settings, I will do select all, again, the Command or Control A, and select everything, come over here to export. Come down here. I really don't change my settings too much. I found that quality of 76 seems to be as good as it possibly can be. I found that with 90, I can't tell the difference between, I would say 65 to 90. If I'm looking at a JPEG side by side, I can't tell the difference. When I go in and I start trying to edit from that JPEG, at that point, maybe I can tell the difference. But for the most part, these are kind of the final images. So I just kind of, I'm happy to let them be at this 76%. You can also do, I guess 300 would be more typical for your pixels per inch. And then if you are shooting a camera that is shooting like 105 megapixel files for some reason, you can always resize it if you want so that everything is maybe something more like 5,000 for the long edge. And beyond that, I don't actually touch anything at all. Everything else is as it is. And I click export, but if I click export right now, it will blow up my computer because I'm doing a screen record and I have Lightroom open. After this, we're gonna move over into Photoshop. I'm gonna show you quickly what I do there, but it's honestly not quite a whole lot. So now that we're in Photoshop, the only thing that I really do here, and I'll actually, I have a batch action set up to do this. In Filter, I actually have Imagenomic Portraiture 3. And what Portraiture 3 does is it simply does skin smoothing. So anything that it detects as a skin tone, it's going to just kind of smooth it out. And I found it to be very, very quick for doing that specific thing. That's all I needed to do, and it's very, very fast. I have it set at default, and then I'll actually click OK. And when it loads, which is only a couple of seconds, which is kind of crazy. So as you can see there, I'll show you the, not histogram, history. So that's how it opened. And just a very slight adjustment there, but completely automatic. I didn't have to do anything. And I'll actually dial that back a little bit, and then I'll go to edit, and I'll actually fade Portraiture 3. So I'll bring this down to something like maybe we'll say 70%. So it's a little more natural, it hides a little bit more. And then actually what I've done, and you can do this yourself as well. So basically what you do is you start recording an action, and say, for instance, my action that kind of exports from Photoshop, all it does is it adds that portraiture, comes up here into image, down to image size, and we're actually gonna make it 98%. So I'm gonna unclick this, and I'm gonna shrink the image just in width-wise down to 98%. So it is exactly the same height-wise, but I'm going to just kind of shrink it this way a little bit. The idea is people that will hopefully just enjoy themselves a little bit better, and they won't really know why. Or if you've just shot it at an incorrect angle, I feel like cameras always just kind of don't really capture exactly how people believe that they feel. So I feel like that kind of does, it makes people a lot happier with their images overall, and it's a very subtle thing. So skin softening, 98% portraiture, and then I close it. And what that basically does is it builds you the ability to come up here into File, and you can go File to Automate to Batch. Sorry that my settings of my file edit image and stuff are all clipped off up here. And then I'll actually come down here into TJ, and it's literally my only action that I have set up. 98 plus portraiture. You pick whatever folder you want to send this at, and then you just click OK, and it will just automatically go through every image in the entire gallery. And I process every single image with it, even if it is not an image with a human face in it. I just kind of let it go throughout the entire gallery. You could go as far as to just like tag all the images that you want with a different color, with the involved faces, but I found that adding skin softening to things that are not faces, that it just doesn't have any effect at all most of the time. So yeah, so I have that. So now it's just very easy. And basically when you're batch processing it like that, all it's doing is playing this, and you have to put a little close at the end of it. So basically when you're recording your thing, maybe to walk you through how I would build it, you basically open up, you start recording here, build a new one. So what I would do, I've started recording right here. I will come up here into Portraiture 3. I'll run that. And then I will come over to image size, 98%. I will save it. Popped up on my other screen. And then I will actually hit Command W, and it will close the image. Now, one of the tricks is that you're now like, oh no, I'm stuck still recording. You gotta come back and you have to quit it here, and then you drag this and just to garbage. And all of a sudden you have your new action. So now whenever you click this button, it'll shrink it to 98%. It will add your imagenomic portraiture. You can also use Skylum. Luminar 4 is also very, very incredible. I found that for batch processing, it is just a little bit slower. With portraiture, all it does is skin softening. So like I'm happy to kind of use that all the time for it. So yeah, that is all that I do for editing. After this, it just goes on the internet and goes out to the couple. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this tutorial. I hope that you found it helpful. There's a lot in there. If you have any specific questions, feel free to put them in the comments, and I will do my best to get back to them, or even create new videos based on maybe things that were left out of this that you felt should have been included. As I mentioned in the intro, there is a lot within this tutorial, but the business side of things is all over on the members website. So if you're interested in, I guess, getting the presets, and as well as if you're into video, there's LUTs on there. When you sign up, you get instant access to everything that's already up there, which is, I think, $3,000 in content at this point. And it is all wedding photography. I guess it kind of all goes into 3 silos. The main silo is wedding photography business, giving you the tools to book your own weddings. The other section is more hands-on tools like the Introvert's Guide to Wedding Photography Posing and the Off-Camera Flash Guide. And then the third section is a bit of one that is kind of my personal interest, which is figuring out how to travel for free, or at least to break even on trips. So that's just kind of some content there that, at least for my dream life, I kind of sat back and figured out that, like, hey, I want to be able to travel as much as I possibly can, and what pieces do I have to put in place to be able to do that? And with photography and potentially some video skills, that all of a sudden you can create amazing things for other brands. So you will find a lot of opportunities. You're not just a quote unquote influencer, because you actually get to be a content creator for them. So you're a heck of a lot more valuable, and you'll find a lot more opportunities. So that third section is kind of all about that. So come on over to the member site if you're interested. There is so much content on there for you to continue to explore this whole wedding photography journey. Hope you found this helpful. Don't forget to add a like or subscribe if you're not yet. And yeah, that's all. Thanks for staying to the end. Have a good day. Enjoy your future wedding photography career, and maybe we'll meet again on the internet, or potentially in real life. Who knows?